In the not-too-distant past, when people believed in fairy tales, there lived in an empire a man nicknamed the Grim Reaper. With just one glance, he could turn a person into ashes. That's what they said about him. For the sake of the country, this monster did not hesitate to stain his hands with blood, a terrible tyrant and an angel of death who knows no mercy. In the empire, this monster was called His Grace Chiron, Archduke of Triton. Having disembarked from the ship not far from the desired castle, Chiron and the soldiers immediately began their assault. Scattering soldiers defending his archduchy, his lordship approached the building. He never hid behind the backs of his warriors, always in the forefront, setting an example and inspiring his knights. And now the duke was the first to enter the castle, leaving behind bloody corpses. One of the dead turned out to be almost a boy, over whom his father was already bending over, mourning. He asked the angel of death why his son was killed and for what. Chiron came closer. The blood of the slain, still wet, dripped from his sword onto the floor. The metal elements on his armor sparkled in the rays of the sun, adding mystery to the whole image. The man with the mustache exclaimed with tears in his eyes why the duke had treated them so cruelly. He did not understand what kind of uprising they were talking about. The gray-haired man claimed that he had been framed and that all these years he had dutifully served His Majesty. His lordship, taking a step further, replied that he did not know. All he knows is that the emperor wants to wipe out the Archduchy of Barton from the face of the earth. The man rose to his knees, letting go of his son's corpse. Chiron raised his sword and invited the Archduke to stop resisting. Barton responded by shouting that the invader was just the emperor's watchdog. And then he called him despicable because he serves such a pitiful master. The warrior clenched his jaw. The gray-haired man was still shouting that Triton would burn in hell for his sins, but the sword was already raised. His lordship cut the owner of the castle in the chest with one blow and he flew off to the wall. Chiron noticed that he suggested not to resist. He could at least die with dignity. The mustachioed man coughed in his death throes. The warrior stepped over his body and opened the door. The room that presented itself greatly surprised the man. It was filled with various trophies, skins, and stuffed animals. In the center of the room stood something very large covered with a burgundy cape. His Excellency, looking around the room, was surprised that it was he who would need to burn in hell, in Barton's opinion. He doubted that the owner of such a collection was destined for a place in heaven. Suddenly, a knock was heard from behind the covered box. Chiron came closer and tugged at the fabric. Directly in front of him, he saw a face pressed against the glass with huge blue eyes. The tank was filled with water, and in it was a woman with long pink hair and a fishtail. "This is a mermaid." And this creature looked at the duke and blinked. Chiron froze, looking at her. A subordinate entered the room looking for his lordship. He began to say that they had cleared almost the entire castle, but the duke stopped him with a wave of his hand, without taking his eyes off the woman. The servant came closer and shuddered. Stuttering a little, the man tried to say that it was a mermaid. Triton had heard that Barton was an avid collector of curiosities, but he would never have thought that the Archduke had managed to capture a creature from fairy tales. The subordinate, still stuttering a little, noted that the collection is the 10th thing, but if you hurt the mermaid, you can die. In any case, that's what they say in the legends. Maybe that's why the mustachioed man died. Chiron replied that Barton died because he started a rebellion, and some fish had nothing to do with it. At this time, the mermaid looked straight at the men, opening her mouth and trying to say, "Help." She tapped her scratched hands on the glass. But people didn't pay much attention to her and continued to discuss what to do next. The chief said that we would take everything with us. Every speck of dust in this castle now belongs to His Majesty. The servant clarified about the mermaid. His lordship replied that the mermaid too, and that the other rooms also needed to be examined. The siren in the aquarium turned her head in all directions. Without thinking of anything else, she hit the glass with her shoulder as hard as she could. This wounded her and some blood was distributed in the water. The warriors turned their attention to her. The duke crossed his arms over his chest and looked at the curiosity with interest. The subordinate tensed a little. He asked the gentleman why he thought she wanted to attack them. After all, if the mermaid does not stop, then she can kill herself. The girl banged her fists on the glass, blood oozing from her wounds. Triton reached for his sword. He suggested that perhaps the Undine wanted to join her master. The servant was nervous and asked the owner if he would kill her. Chiron took out his sword and tapped on the glass. He replied, "Why not? His Majesty gave the order to kill every inhabitant of this castle. His lordship ran his blade across the glass. The warrior asked to wait, but the Duke swung and slashed at the aquarium with all his might. There was a terrible crash. The glass burst and all the contents spilled into the room. The mermaid managed to grab the main man by the lapels and plopped right into his arms. Sitting up a little, the two stared at each other. Yellow eyes opposite blue. Kieran raised his hand and extended it to the girl's face. He didn't even notice that those eyes. His fingers removed the water from her face. Serena smiled, her eyes sparkling, and she squeezed the Duke's hand with hers. This is a story about the recent past. The story of a mythical mermaid and her only person, her serenade. The mermaid's eyes were so blue that you could drown in them. The girl extended her wounded hand to Kieran, but the man managed to intercept it, still not letting go of the Undine. The Duke turned to his subordinate Ian and asked him to put her in some container with water and bring her back to him without any questions. Triton went into the office. This is his second time in this room. When His Excellency stood near the work table and touched the figurine, memories came flooding back to him. Many years ago, when Kieran was still a teenager, he stood in this same place with the king. A little further, near the fireplace, a man knelt down. He said, stuttering a little, that the kingdom of Barton would lay down its arms and become the Archduchy of Barton. They swear to serve the king faithfully. The Lord begged His Majesty to have mercy on them. The Emperor called the boy and ordered him to watch carefully. On the table stood a figurine depicting several men entwined with snakes. The king pushed this sculpture to the floor. It broke into several fragments, just like today's statue. Already an adult Triton muttered that this place was as disgusting as before. John entered and addressed his lordship. They brought a mermaid. It was ordered to bring her in containers of water, but the Duke chuckled and quipped about the fact that she had grown legs. The servant confirmed that the creature turned as soon as the last drops of water dried on her. And indeed, the girl stood on 2 legs, supported by the knight's arms. Her body was trembling. As soon as she was released, she plopped onto the floor. Kieran grabbed her chin and lifted her face. He concluded that a fish can turn into a person. The siren's body was still trembling. The Duke said that Barton kept a rather interesting piece of art in his castle. He began to slowly turn the girl's head in different directions, examining her. Then he noticed that the mermaid's entire body was covered in tattered wounds. The man asked Jan what it was, and why there were so many abrasions on it. War trophies must be handled with care, so he asked the servant to take better care of the siren. The guy was a little nervous because it wasn't his fault. The wounds were already on her body when his lordship broke the aquarium. Perhaps they were left behind by the former owner. The mermaid's eyes grew dim and she began to tremble even more. The girl remembered how Barton pulled her out of the tank and whipped her with a whip. He kept saying that mermaids shed pearly tears. Therefore, the owner beat her more and more to make her cry in pain. He shouted at her to cry, otherwise he would beat her half to death. Undine was mired in terrible memories. Her eyes were wide open. Therefore, she did not immediately hear that they were addressing her. Kieran lifted her head back up by the chin, and when their eyes met, he asked if she could hear him. His Excellency was simply mesmerized by the girl's eyes. He gently stroked her cheek with his fingers. He likes those eyes. Siren tried to mutter something, but Ian tried to push the gentleman away with his hand. He asked him to leave. The knights behind also tensed and drew their swords. Triton asked what they were doing. The servant apologized and explained that they say that the voice of a mermaid steals a person's soul. The commander-in-chief became angry. He told Ian that he would stop talking about fairy tales. The servant had already disturbed His Excellency once by talking about them. The guy mumbled guiltily that it was better to be on the safe side than... At this time, the Undine made several vowel sounds. The men all jumped in surprise. The knights rushed with their swords. Yang also reached for the scabbard. But the Duke stopped them with a wave of his hand. Meanwhile, the girl continued to make sounds. I heard eti and ochu. The Duke asked again. The mermaid squeezed his cape and said the word is, and then added that she wanted. Serena said again, but more clearly that she wanted to eat, and then added feed. Kieran asked the servant if he had heard. The guy confirmed that yes, the girl asked to feed her. His lordship laughed loudly. This greatly surprised everyone present, especially the warriors. They had never seen the commander-in-chief laugh. The Duke lifted the mermaid's face by the chin. He never thought that he would receive such an interesting trophy. The man asked Yang if he wasn't curious what would happen if they brought her to the Empire. The ship glided along the watery surface of the sea. Triton stood on the captain's bridge and gave orders. He ordered to raise the sails, since the tailwind would soon increase. The sailors immediately began to fuss on deck and began to tighten the ropes. The sails opened and were immediately filled with wind. With the sails at full speed, the ship began to pick up speed, cutting through the waves at full speed. A servant came up to the captain. He cleared his throat and began to say that they had been on the road for a long time and had not only subdued the nomads who were always attacking the western border, but also suppressed Barton's rebellion. It turns out that the team left the gates of Triton Castle almost 6 months ago. Kieran was already beginning to lose patience and urged Ian to quickly get to the heart of the matter. The guy was clearly nervous and began to stutter a little. His Excellency once again reprimanded the servant, ordering him not to pull the cat by the tail, but to get down to business. The subordinate said that this was regarding the mermaid. Soon the ship will enter the waters of Bercez. Perhaps she will be released there. For His Majesty ordered that no prisoners should be taken at Barton Castle. The Duke thought about it because in fact she is not a person, but a fish. It can be kept as a representative of another species. Ian was very surprised and clarified that it was like a pet. Kieran did not answer but only asked what the girl was doing. Then the Lord chuckled, crossed his arms over his chest and began to savor the phrase, "my fish." And he clearly liked it. The men went down to the cabin where the siren was located. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself, shaking violently. Triton asked what was wrong with her. The servant replied that perhaps the Undine was uncomfortable in clothes. She constantly pulls and tears her dress. My lord noticed that the mermaid was very pale. He ordered to feed her something before sailing. John replied that they gave her the fish that was in the castle. His lordship was surprised. The servant explained that in the room where the creature was kept there were buckets of fish. They decided that they were feeding her with this, so they gave the siren their contents. The captain asked again that the fish was raw. The subordinate responded positively. It is unlikely that a mermaid will eat soup or fried meat. Kieran sat down next to the girl. He touched her face. Undine shuddered. The man ordered her not to twitch. He pressed his jaw and opened the mermaid's mouth slightly. Curious. Her mouth is warm and her face is unhealthy, as if dying. The creature coughed a little. Ian asked what to do. Maybe we should release her into the sea, not yet. Then the mermaid moaned. Water. The Duke barked at the servant. What is he worth? The girl asks for water. The subordinate explained that they were trying to give her water, but she didn't touch it, even when there was just a decanter of water standing nearby. The servants brought a jug of water. Triton replied that the creature is a mermaid, and she needs water not only to quench her thirst. Ian did not understand what the gentleman meant. Then my lord simply poured all the water directly on the girl. The mermaid took a deep breath. Water dripped from it onto the floor. The Duke asked how she was, if she was feeling better. Siren muttered a thank you. She extended her hand and wanted to say something else, but the captain had already turned away and was giving orders. He ordered a third assistant to be called to look after the Undine, and also to call his lordship when she feels better. Just as the captain was about to leave, he heard a faint, "Don't go." He froze. The creature grabbed his leg and begged him to stop. The Duke turned to the girl. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't do it well. Kieran concluded that he has no desire to take on an animal that requires a lot of time. But still, he leaned towards the mermaid. She reached out her hand to him and touched his face. Then she put her other hand around his neck. The man began to say what the hell she allows herself, but the siren's finger touched his lips. Their gazes met and her eyes sparkled. The girl whispered to him not to leave. The hand touching his face began to weaken and the mermaid somehow slowly began to slide down. His lordship only managed to catch her before she flopped onto the floor. Undine lay unconscious in his arms. Her breathing was barely noticeable. The lord did not understand at all what was happening. Under a huge moon, two mermaids sat on a boulder in the sea and talked. The eldest explained to her fellow tribesmen that she must kill him before she went to bed. The siren will understand what they are talking about now when she meets her serenade. The younger one asked again. She would definitely understand when she saw it, since at the moment she did not understand anything. Our Undine remembered this conversation when she first saw Kieran behind the glass of the aquarium. She looked at him very closely. Black hair, wide eyebrows, dark eyelashes, yellow eyes, regular facial features, tall, fit body. The mermaid was looking for a serenade that will always live in her memory. When she meets him, she will be able to give birth to the most beautiful mermaid. But the Undine was caught in the net by Barton's sailors. She was terribly scared then. A bunch of dirty men crowded around her, laughing loudly and pointing. Siren injured her fingers while trying to rip the nets, and around there are black faces and torches. The girl woke up from a nightmare. She felt the water. Having gathered life-giving moisture into her palms, the mermaid realized that this was the sea. Joyful thoughts swirled in her head that she had finally returned to the ocean. A man's voice said that she had a tail again. Siren shuddered. This man again. She finally came to her senses and looked back. The girl saw that she was still in the same cabin but in the bathroom. The Duke stood a little further away against the wall, leaning on the table. He held a glass in his hand, which he placed on the table. Undine turned to him. The question in my head was whether he had put it in the water. She also wanted to thank him, but she didn't know how to do it in human language. Meanwhile, Kieran was approaching the bath. He asked the creature if she was feeling better. She nodded. It seems that it was not in vain that he forced Ian to fill the container with water from the ocean. His lordship sat down on a chair nearby and touched the mermaid's forehead. The man asked if she understood him at all. Then the lord remembered the words from the legend that if you hurt a mermaid, you can die. So this is a curse to death. The girl looked at my lord so naively and at ease that he thought that this creature was too stupid-looking to impose such a curse. At this time, the Undine looked at her reflection in the water. Siren splashed the water, and this amused her. Triton unfastened his sheath and began to make a whirlpool in the water. The girl watched carefully, and then abruptly caught the weapon with her palms. The man wanted to ask what she was doing, but the mermaid began to laugh. The Duke did not know how to behave. He wanted to take the scabbard, but the Undine held it tightly. My lord remembered his childhood. When his mother read him stories about mermaids, she warned the boy. Mermaids are very beautiful, but you don't need to be charmed by their appearance. They seduce men by singing and cast illusions on them that drive everyone crazy. Then the image of the dying Barton appeared in my head, who said the way you are now. He drove away the obsession. The sheath opened in the siren's hands and a knife blade appeared. The girl was interested in the shiny metal. She extended her hands towards him and began to stroke the steel. Kieran asked her to remove her hands, but the mermaid did not pay attention. Then he said more sharply. The Undine shuddered and looked at the man. She repeated the word, "Put away." But she hesitated and cut herself on the blade. There was blood. Serena felt a strong burning sensation. This thing was clearly designed to cause terrible pain. The Duke grabbed his head. Even parrots know more words. His lordship decided to teach her the language while they were on the ship. He stood up and headed towards the exit. The mermaid looked after him. She mentally asked him why he was leaving. It probably frightens him that she can't speak. The girl extended her hand to him, mentally begging not to leave and promising to study hard. But Triton did not hear her thoughts. He went out and slammed the door. Kieran and his retinue galloped on a horse through the streets of the capital. The people bowed before the procession. Behind him was a large closed carriage drawn by a pair of horses. One of the knights tried to look inside. He asked the vice commander what was in the cart, but Ian replied that, unfortunately, the chief forbade talking about it. The warrior sighed in disappointment. The Duke noticed that the townspeople were still afraid of him. People trembled, looking down. It seemed that the warriors had come not with victory, but with the goal of capturing them. Rumor has it that one look into the commander's eyes turns a man to ashes. Yang exhaled loudly. The late emperor greatly ruined my lord's life. He contributed to his lordship's image as the ultimate Grim Reaper. The subject looked around. He understood that these were just empty conversations and there was no point in attaching importance to them. After all, everything will calm down soon. Exactly, everything will be fine. The cart rumbled and clattered along the stone streets. A hand appeared from under the cover inside the cart, and then the face of a curious mermaid. The maid Anna walked along the corridors of the palace. He was carrying a full bucket of raw fish and squid. Another worker called out to her and asked where she was going. The girl replied that she needed to look into the kitchen. Another maid joined the conversation. They asked about the kitchen and at such an hour. The women began to laugh openly. Then they quipped that she already needed to be fed. The maids feigned regret that the girl had only been here for a few months, but had to do such hard work every day. Anna smiled. It's not that bad. The workers doubted it. They just heard about everything. All the maids are just talking about this, how they find a free moment to stand together. They say that his lordship brought his mistress here, and not just an ordinary one but a real mermaid." Anna frowned at these words. The women continued to talk about how sirens kill people with their songs. "It's not even like that. People die just by hearing their voice and the like." The girl had already stopped listening to them and went on about her business. She was angry with the chatty maids. After all, if mermaids were capable of killing with just their voices, then Anna would have been lying in the ground long ago. She knocked on the door and entered the room. In the room, a pink-haired mermaid sat in a large pool of water. The maid apologized for being late. Ondine was delighted with the visitor and said hello, but did not address her by her full name, but simply Anne. The maid approached the pool with a bucket. She corrected the siren that her name was Anna, not Anne. The mermaid clarified and called Anne. The maid called Anna again. Then she breathed out helplessly. "The lady is so good at other words, but for some reason her name is not one of them." Ondine laughed, leaning her elbows on the railing of the tank. All she did was sit all day in the water and chew raw fish. The worker moved the bucket of fish closer and offered to help us. She noticed that last time the mermaid liked squid, so today she brought more. The water nymph took the squid out of the bucket and happily said thank you. Anna was glad that the lady remembered the words of gratitude. Footsteps were heard outside the door. The mermaid froze with the squid in her hands. The maid asked if the girl was waiting for someone. The siren repeated, "Waiting." The maid explained that in other words it means wanting to see someone. If you think about it this way, then when the lady mermaid arrived, Count Jan von Luthern often came to see her in the first months. Therefore, Anna asked that perhaps the Undine was waiting for Jan. The girl repeated the name. She thought that perhaps her black-haired savior's name was Yang. Remembering him, her cheeks turned pink, which was noticed by the maid. The worker sat down on the side of the pool. She asked the nymph what she liked so much about him, his beauty or his noble birth. The mermaid repeated the word like, and then she joyfully exclaimed that yes, I like Ian. Anna began stroking the siren's hair. She noticed that the count had completely stopped visiting her. Then why did she love him? The girl became completely thoughtful. The maid asked her to turn around. She wanted to braid her hair. Ondine remembered how Kieran touched her hair and face. She thinks about him all the time now. He is her man, her serenade. Everything is as the sisters said. Only when she saw this man, the mermaid immediately realized that he was hers. That's why she waits for him no matter how long it takes. Waiting is nothing for the nymph. The maid had her pink hair braided in a thick braid. She said she would go away for a minute to get her hair jewelry. Ondine nodded. The sisters taught her that she had to wait a very long time to receive her serenade. Carried away by her thoughts, the mermaid plunged into the water and blew bubbles with her nose. There was a knock on the door. Siren turned, thinking that it was Anna who had returned, but Triton entered the room. He asked who she was waiting for. The man leaned over and sat down on the side. The nymph was confused and looked straight at him. Kieran said she looked funny and hadn't learned to speak yet. Then he asked why she was without a tail again. The girl asked a new word for her. My lord touched her feet, indicating that he was here. The mermaid thought about it. Since she arrived here, the girl has not been able to turn into a mermaid. She wondered what was the matter. Maybe because of the water, it doesn't have the same smell as the sea. She mentally already called him Yang, but scooping the liquid into her hands and handing it to him, she said, "Water." His lordship did not understand what the nymph wanted to say. The siren despaired. She still extended her palms with moisture to him and shook her head. Then she said, "Yang, water." My lord frowned when he heard the count's name. The door knocked and a maid entered the room. She was afraid for her mistress and pushed the duke away from the pool with all her strength. Afterwards, Anna hugged the mermaid and screamed at the man, who he was, and how dare he burst into the girl's room when she was alone. And she added that the lord should leave immediately. His lordship got hit on the head, so he grabbed his forehead with his hand. He quickly stood up and indignantly asked how she dared to order him to leave. The maid still hugged her mistress, protecting her from the unfamiliar man. Kieran, still rubbing his forehead, asked if she was sure it was addressed to him. The maid started screaming. She shouted that she was completely sure. The mermaid tried to call her, but Anna continued to be indignant that what madman would dare. She didn't finish. The girl even shuddered at her guess. Stuttering, she addressed his lordship. The duke, still kneading the bruised parts of his body, asked if some new rule had been introduced here while he was away. Now he needs permission to see his property. The maid fell prostrate before my lord. She sincerely apologized since she had only recently worked at the castle and was unable to recognize the master. Her body was trembling with fear. Anna admitted that she deserved to die. Triton took the hilt of his sword. He acknowledged that the maid does her job well, but she must know whom she serves. The Lord drew his sword. The worker began to stutter even more, and tears began to flow from her eyes. Siren flinched at the sight of the steel blade. Shouting, "No!" she jumped out of the pool and hugged the man's hips. She repeated again, "Ian, no!" The nymph looked into Kieran's eyes and called him back Ian. Mentally, she asked him not to do anything. She remembered that it was a dangerous thing, made to hurt people. Then she said the words "no" and "thank you." My lord chuckled. He explained that in such a situation they do not say "thank you," but ask for a favor. His lordship leaned down and lifted the Undine's head by the chin. The mermaid repeated the word "service." The man noticed that the girl had learned new words. In vain he thought she was dumb. He then squeezed her forearm and summarized that there was some meat on the bones. Triton lifted the Undine. Looking into her eyes, he noted that now she even knows how to jump into his arms. My lord praised his fish. What should he do now? Since she stopped his blade, he will fulfill her wish. Kieran asked if the siren wanted him to kill this maid. She asked what kill meant. Anna shuddered and sobbed even more. She crossed her hands in supplication and asked him to have mercy and not kill her. Triton clarified, because the maid herself said that she deserved to die. The maid replied that she had made a mistake and begged him to forgive her. She will do anything, just spare her. The nymph muttered the word mercy. Kieran leaned close to the girl's ear and told her to try saying spare her. She must say it herself, and then he will leave Anna alive. His lordship took the mermaid by the arms above the elbows and ordered her to say, "I beg you, have mercy on her." Siren muttered, "Spare her," and then more loudly and clearly said "spare her" and added, "Please." The Duke leaned right into the Undine's face and ran his hand along her back. The girl called him Jan questioningly. My lord pushed the nymph away and condescendingly added that so be it, he would keep his word. But the worker must teach her to speak better. The maid moved closer to the mermaid and hugged her. Triton's property must know his name, and the lord hopes that next time he won't hear about any Jan. His lordship put the blade back into its sheath and headed towards the exit. Anna thanked and promised to teach the siren everything. Later in the evening, my lord lay on the couch. The count came to meet him. The subordinate bowed and said that he had heard about his meeting with the mermaid, and that the new maid was rude to the master. Ian apologized. He felt guilty for not training his staff properly. The Duke noted that rumors fly quickly. Then he added that she asked him to spare her. The count asked again. His lordship was fiddling with a bottle of medicine in his hands. He explained that the mermaid asked him for a favor, so she said, "Spare her, please." It's a little strange. He remembered Barton. There is nothing more nerve-wracking than seeing someone throw away the last of their pride and collapse at their feet, begging for mercy. But there was something special about this fish from the very minute he looked at it. There was something unusual. The guy wanted to clarify, but Kieran took a sip of medicine and said that the count could go. Yang noticed that lately the gentleman had become very addicted to this medicine. He was worried that this might affect his health. His lordship looked menacingly at his comrade. Is it really better for him to suffer from insomnia for the rest of his life than to become dependent on medication? So my lord barked at him not to force him to repeat it, but to simply leave. The count left. There was a throbbing sensation in my temples. Triton put his hand to his head and closed his eyes. Images immediately began to appear before my eyes. First, the Duke of Barton, who repeated that the Lord was just the Emperor's little dog. Then the pleading servant with tears in her eyes said that she did not want to die. Then another dying ghost called him and stretched his hands towards him. The last to appear was the image of a mermaid, who first asked to spare her. And then she touched his face and called him by name. Kieran opened his eyes. How tired he is of all this. On a beautiful sunny summer day, in one of the rooms of the castle, the slap of bare feet on the marble floor was heard. Siren practiced walking. Her legs trembled and her steps were not entirely confident, but she tried. Anna helped her mistress cope, encouraged her and, if necessary, supported her. Step by step, the nymph learned to walk. The maid was pleased, because today the mermaid took 2 steps more. Undine also rejoiced at her success, because now she will be able to go outside. It was amazing. After resting a little, the girl began to take steps again. The maid asked if the mistress still wanted to practice. The girl confirmed. The worker was touched by the mermaid's persistence. She reminded her of her brothers and sister. Anna came from a large family. She was the eldest. There were also 2 brothers and a sister. Siren repeated the words brothers, sisters. The family lived poorly, so the parents worked all day, and the maid had to take care of the younger ones. The maid changed their diapers, helped them take their first steps, and much more. But the children did not listen to her at all. And sometimes the girl was ready to literally tear her hair out, but they are family and she loves them. Anna then turned directly to the nymph. After all, if she had not stopped the Duke, the maid would never have seen them again. The maid thanked the lady and shed a little tears. Suddenly, some screams were heard very close by. Some blonde lady was cursing and practically fighting with the maids. She shouted that she wanted to stay another day and asked what was wrong with them. Anna hid the mistress behind a column. The maids told the ladies that they were just following orders. His lordship gave orders to send her home as soon as she woke up. The worker thought for a moment and guessed which woman the head maid was talking to. She whispered in the mermaid's ear that last night the lord invited a woman to his place. Apparently it was her. The mermaid asked what it meant to invite. Anna explained that this meant that they spent the night together. Siren was surprised and began to remember where she heard it. The sisters said that in order to give birth to a child, you need to spend the night with your serenade. The women's screaming continued. The maids tried to push the woman out, but she struggled. The maid thought. So the rumors are true. My lord always sends women home the morning after inviting them. Then she came to her senses and, pulling the mistress, suggested moving to another place. The mermaid tried to stop, but Anna carried her further and further. She wished she had been able to ask the lady what it was like to spend a night with a serenade. A decade ago, young Kiran stood on the battlefield next to the king. A man knelt in front of them with his hands tied behind his back. The boy held the bare blade and trembled all over. The emperor yelled at the boy, "Why did he stand rooted to the spot? We need to finish him off already." Kiran shuddered, tears flowing from his eyes. He couldn't because this man was his mentor. The king was angry. He said that he doesn't teach the guy anymore. This is just a traitor who wanted to kill them by selling information to the enemy side. The boy still had doubts. He hoped that there might have been a misunderstanding. Kiran asked his brother, that is, His Majesty, still trembling and sobbing. The emperor gave him a resounding slap in the face. The boy staggered, touching the bruised area. The emperor wondered when his younger brother would become a normal member of the ruling dynasty. Then, pointing his finger at the man, he said that the emperor was ordering him or himself to be killed. It is necessary to prove that the guy is ready to stand next to the monarch. Or he still thinks he has a choice. Tears ran down the child's cheeks and dripped onto the ground. He raised his sword but still turned to Duncan. Kiran did not believe that his mentor could be a traitor. After all, he taught him for so many years and couldn't just forget about it. The man was silent. The boy shouted for Duncan to say that it was not his fault. Then the king's brother will do everything in his power. The mentor looked up at the student and told him to do what His Majesty ordered. There is no need to resist. The criminal awaits punishment. His Highness remembered one lesson. Duncan explained that the blade is the ruler's cane. He must always rely on it to get closer to what he wants. The sword was not created to blindly kill and maim people. And Kiran must take up the blade for the well-being of his people. The guy gathered his strength. His pupils narrowed. The tears had not yet dried in his eyes. With one blow of the sword, the enemy fell lifeless. His last words were that the Duke must survive. His lordship woke up from his memories and took a deep breath. He got up from the couch and walked over to open the window. Voices were heard on the street. Anna asked the lady mermaid to stop. My lord looked out the window. He saw a siren running down the path and giggling, and the maid was trying to catch up with her with shoes in her hands. She shouted that first she needed to put on her shoes. Late at night, another bottle of medicine fell to the floor with a clang. Kiran sat on the sofa, clutching his head. All these drugs were useless. No matter what he took, there was no result. The ghosts of the past still reached out to him and grabbed his legs. If his whole life goes like this... The Duke thought about it. He remembered the mermaid running merrily and his mother's words. Mermaids are more beautiful than any person, but you cannot be fooled by their appearance. They say they can take souls with their songs. The man smiled at the thought of stealing souls. Bowing his head, my lord muttered that perhaps it would be even better. Ian ran up to his lordship. Seeing a pile of broken glass around, he asked what was happening. The Lord looked at the Count with a dull look and said that he had come on time and asked to bring the mermaid immediately. The siren walked accompanied by a knight. His armor rang in the night silence of the castle, echoing throughout the room. The nymph leaned on the warrior's hand, but at some point her legs got tangled in a long dress. Siren stopped to lift her hem. The soldier asked what was wrong with her. The girl asked to wait a little. The man, looking at her eyes, blushed and turned away. He replied that the Duke ordered him to come immediately. The nymph wondered what it meant to come. The knight brought the mermaid to the master's chambers. He indicated that she needed to go there. She will go on without him. Just beyond the door is the living room, which you need to go through. Then turn right, and there will be his lordship's bedroom. The girl listened very carefully. When she finally arrived, Chiron met her there. He said he had to wait a long time for the siren. She stopped at the entrance and grabbed the partition. My lord was wearing a white shirt unbuttoned at the chest. His hair was disheveled and his gaze was hard. He asked if she had learned to walk. Undine beamed. Yes, she walked a lot. The Duke walked over to the bed and sat down on it. Then the man invited the mermaid to try to come straight to him. The girl concentrated and began to walk little by little with trembling legs. The long dress decorated with bows got in the way, so she again got tangled in the skirts and fell. The Lord smiled and asked what was wrong with her. She must go to the end. Siren tensed and began to slowly rise. Her body was shaking. She lifted the hem of her skirt and slowly walked towards Chiron. The mermaid happily said, "It worked." But the man pulled her by the hand, plopped her down on the bed and hovered over her. She had to get here. The Duke lifted her leg. He asked how long she had been walking that her legs were so warm. The girl looked at him with large, uncomprehending eyes. The Lord slightly squeezed her ankle and asked if she was tired. The water nymph blushed a little. She replied that everything was fine. His lordship, still not letting go of his leg, bowed lower and said that it was great then and asked me to sing for him. Siren looked into his eyes and did not understand. The man touched her lips with his fingers and once again asked her to sing for him right now. When Chiron was a boy, he would sit on the beach and watch the sea for hours. He listened to the sound of the surf, inhaled the aroma of the ocean, watched the ebb and flow of the tides. His mentor was worried about his student's behavior. He found him once again on the beach, and even the cold wind was not a hindrance. Duncan asked the young Duke what was bothering him, since he spent all day looking at the sea. The boy replied that the sea fascinates him, so he wants it for himself. He wants to touch him with his own hands at least once. And now, many years later, Chiron owned the sea in the form of a mermaid. He stroked her face and asked why she was silent, why she didn't sing the song. The nymph asked what the song was. His lordship was surprised. She doesn't know what it is. She didn't teach them, or she was afraid to teach, knowing that they were cursed. Everyone first promises to serve with all their hearts, swears allegiance, but in the end they cannot hide their essence forever. This mermaid is a monster. This means she can definitely kill him. My lord chuckled. It looks like the stupid people really kept her like a simple fish in an aquarium. The man said one of the names of the seas, Berses, and asked the nymph if she was familiar with this name. Siren opened her eyes and opened her mouth. Chiron just spoke their language. His lordship noticed the girl's reaction, and he guessed that the mermaids really spoke an ancient language. The nymph nodded happily in response, and Berses apparently means lullaby. The Duke lay down on the side, the bed creaking under him. He stroked the girl's cheek and asked her to sing Berses. She turned her head towards him and looked intently. The man hurried, touching her lips. The mermaid began to make melodious sounds. The Lord listened attentively. But it was not a song but a spell that awakens very old memories. It's drizzling and the wind is driving the waves crashing against the shore. The boy goes into the depths of the water. He then said that he wanted to take possession of the sea, but in fact he only wanted to fall into its arms. You can no longer feel the soil under your feet. There is a solid wall of water all around, which lulls you to sleep with its measured rocking. A small spot of light is visible through the abyss, and the depth draws you deeper into serenity. If only the guy could touch him and die without fear. If only he could die at sea. Chiron looked into the mermaid's eyes and drowned in the depths of those blue eyes. They enveloped him more and more. Now I understand why he brought her here. Lord himself argued that fairy tales are simple fables, but in fact he apparently wanted the nymph to charm and kill him. The Duke stroked the girl's face and then kissed her. Siren was stunned. She tried to find out what it was, but the man told her to continue singing Berzes. He didn't ask to stop. His lordship touched the pink hair, moving back to his lips. He whispered to her to continue until she swallowed him completely. The mermaid, blushing, continued to purr the melody. My lord began to kiss the nymph back until he was completely lost in the sensations and sounds of the melody. The next morning, the siren woke up and suddenly jumped up in bed. She looked around, trying to reconstruct the events of last night. Seeing Kieran nearby, she shuddered. That's right. They fell asleep like that yesterday. Remembering the kiss, the girl immediately flushed. She wondered what he did to her yesterday. It was something that tickled her and made her heart flutter. This means that encountering a serenade evokes such feelings. The nymph carefully extended her hand to his lips and touched them. The man woke up abruptly, so she didn't even have time to react. He immediately grabbed her throat with both hands and began to squeeze. The girl resisted and screamed. She began to choke and wheeze. Somehow the mermaid whispered, "Let go." The mermaid was almost out of breath. She grabbed the Duke's hands and tried to pull them away. She was in pain. The nymph screamed with her last strength for him to let her go. The lord flinched from her scream and seemed to wake up from a dream. He instantly unclasped his fingers. The girl coughed, trying to catch her breath. The man finally came to his senses and looked around. He saw a bright light in the window. It's strange. The sun had already risen, but he didn't dream of anything. His lordship leaned over to the Undine and asked if she was going to take his soul. If yes, then he will need it. Siren didn't understand him at all. Returning to her place, the mermaid shared her emotions with Anna. She bombarded the lady with questions. She kissed the Duke yesterday. This was a new word for the girl. The maid explained that this is when lips touch, but she asked me not to do this to other people. It's called a kiss. Kisses are very important. They are something special, and they are done only with those for whom there are feelings. The nymph touched her cheek. Feelings? She remembered how she and Kieran were lying in bed and he stroked her cheek. How he kissed her lips, her palms. This means he considers her his mate. And so my lord gave her a name, Melusine. Triton couldn't concentrate on his work. He tried to figure it out. After the death of the last emperor, he could not sleep normally even with sleeping pills for 5 years. Yang wondered if this might be the influence of the mermaid. If so, then today his lordship too. Kieran interrupted him, asking if this is exactly what he came to talk about early in the morning. At the moment, the lord is not at all aware of the affairs of the Marquis of Gesnal recently. The count quickly came to his senses and, rummaging through the papers, found the report. The Marquis doubled the number of his soldiers this year. This is when compared with the past, and by the end of this year he plans to increase their number 3 times, excluding nobles who supported the overthrow of the previous emperor. The work was mainly carried out in the imperial palace or in the capital. Almost everyone agrees and supports it. His lordship noticed that everything was worse than they thought. Ian agreed. He asked if people should be sent to the Marquis. My lord shook his leg as he sat in his chair. He replied that in 2 months these people would not be needed, so we're watching for now. After a short pause, Kieran addressed his subordinate by his full name. He was a little surprised. The Duke then asked if he was sure. The Count did not understand what was going on. The Lord insisted that he understood. He asked if Ian was sure that he wanted to become a rebel with him. Triton paused for a moment and then continued speaking. It may be too late to discuss this, but you don't have to follow the plan. For supporting his plan, Ian may be in danger. Kieran asked the Count to be careful, because he was his assistant and not just a servant. The guy continued to hold a pile of documents in his hands. He turned to my lord, saying that the Duke's aspirations were his aspirations too, and he asked permission to go with him to the end. My lord chuckled, savoring the phrase, "Your aspirations are my aspirations." He thanked his subordinate for such words and released him. Ian turned to leave, but finally suggested that if necessary, he would send the mermaid again for the night. The lord's hand on the armrest trembled. Siren was really useful. His lordship lit a cigar. Blowing out puffs of smoke, the man began to think. How many times does he need to listen to her song in order to fall into eternal sleep? There was a knock on the door and a knight looked into the room. He said that the gentleman asked to bring the Undine again. The maid was just finishing the nymph's toilet, fastening a necklace around her neck. Anna was delighted. After all, she said that the master would call her again. He definitely liked the mermaid. It's good that the maid prepared her in advance. Serena was sitting in a beautiful dress with a corset. She straightened her hair and repeated the word, liked. As the knight led the girl away, the maid asked her to be careful. The warrior carefully supported the nymph, helping her walk. Anna looked after them and realized that the knight also treated her mistress with care. She spent the night with the duke and still remains in the castle. This is the first time. His lordship clearly feels something special for her. The floor creaked under the mermaid's feet as she entered my lord's chambers. The room was pitch dark. The girl looked around, trying to see at least something. She wondered where Kieran was. Suddenly, arms wrapped around her waist from behind and a male voice called her Melusine and said that he had been waiting. Siren shuddered and Triton began to examine and touch her. He noticed that today the nymph was especially elegant. The girl froze. It was unpleasant for her when he touched her there. His lordship was fiddling with the details of his clothing. The mermaid asked to wait, but the duke thought that she was uncomfortable and he decided to help her. They accidentally caught the necklace and the beads scattered on the floor. The man pressed himself against her neck from behind, inhaling the scent of her skin. He muttered something about the clumsy maid and how the nymph smelled different now. Then he invited Melusine to take off her clothes. The girl was confused. She didn't understand how to remove it or what she needed to do. Kieran's hands wandered all over her ribbons and ties. Then he realized that she didn't know how to film all this. His lordship sat down on the bed. Undine stood before him. He gently tugged at the corset band, saying that he said he didn't like pets that required too much attention. As soon as all the fasteners were conquered, the dress fell at the feet of the winner. Siren was left in only her shirt. She was a little confused and immediately blushed. My lord, looking at her, was surprised at the reaction. He asked what happened and assumed that the nymph decided to be shy. But Melusine almost jumped for joy. It's much more convenient for her. She thanked the man. Kieran smiled. She was happy because of such a little thing. If she was truly grateful, then... He grabbed her by the waist and pulled her onto his lap. The mermaid only had time to gasp. Holding the girl in his arms, Triton asked to begin her work. He asked to sing Berceuse. The mermaid smiled and the enchanting sounds of the melody flowed from her lips. The sun's rays were already breaking through the curtains into the windows. Melusine blinked her eyes, waking up. She looked at the windows and realized that it was already dawn. Then the nymph looked at the sleeping duke nearby. She likes it so much that Kieran is always around lately. But it's a little unfortunate that he didn't kiss her like last time. It was so nice. She carefully straightened his hair. Since they often spend nights together, it means she can get pregnant. Serena hoped that this would happen soon. She admired his facial features. He has incredibly beautiful eyes and nose. She gently stroked his cheekbones with her fingertips, and then lightly kissed his forehead. His lordship opened his eyes and stared at her. The girl got scared and covered her mouth with her hands. But Kieran managed to grab her hand. He looked great in the morning sun. The man smiled and teased Melusine with feigned surprise that she could do this too. My lord still held her hand with one hand and gently grabbed the back of her head with the other. He asked not to turn away. Triton covered the mermaid's lips with his own, their tongues intertwined in a kiss. His lordship pressed the siren to the bed with his body. With his left hand he lifted her thigh and pressed her even closer. But the girl coughed. She didn't have enough air. Kieran said to breathe through the nose. That's why they used to kiss only with their lips. He will show you how to do it right. She just needs to relax. And the man kissed the nymph again. During the day, Melusine walked in the garden. Anna ran back after her with her shoes. She offered her to put on her shoes. But the mermaid did not want to. She was already comfortable. It was so beautiful all around. Many flowers emitted different scents. Undine climbed into the flower bed. She was delighted that the flowers had opened up more than they had on the previous walk. The nymph examined each flower. This yellow one is called freesia. There was a blue butterfly sitting on the marigolds. Siren did not know the name of such a flower. The moth flapped its wings and took off. The girl followed him and saw the duke approaching. He extended his hand and a butterfly landed on his finger. Melusine was surprised. This flower is moving. She asked what it was called. Kieran replied that it is not a flower, it is a butterfly. The insect flapped its wings and flew away. The mermaid repeated the word butterfly. My lord praised her and said that in her language it is called efshaik. The girl sat down on the path and watched the flying moth. Triton stood nearby. Then the nymph looked back at the man. The wind blew her hair. She called the Lord by name. He praised her for remembering his name and flicked her forehead. Siren yelped. Kiran said her pronunciation was terrible and she needed to try to pronounce it better. She replied that she would try. The Duke turned around and moved towards the exit. On the way, he said that he would call the maid. When Melusine has had enough of the flowers, let her return to the house. As soon as the mermaid realized that he was leaving, she jumped up sharply and said the word together. Then, after thinking, she added that she wanted to go together. His lordship looked at her and answered, "As you wish." The girl beamed with joy and rushed to catch up with the man. Triton headed towards the training yard, where the warm-up was in full swing, and the clanging of steel could be heard. The nymph was amazed by what she saw. Anna caught up with her near the gate. She asked why Serena followed the master all the way to the training ground. If his lordship had not closed his eyes to this, they would have been kicked out long ago. Melusine watched in fascination as the knights practiced with swords. The maid once again asked her mistress if she could hear her. "It's dangerous here and they could get hurt if they're not careful." But then the mermaid saw the Duke riding a beautiful black horse. She beamed and pointed it out to the maid. The girl said it was Chiron. Anna said that the Duke really makes an incredible impression. Her father was also a knight at Triton Castle, and he said that only his grace among all the commanders trained every day. My lord pulled the reins, praised the warriors, and said that was all for today. The maid continued that if father had not died in battle, he would also be here. But the mermaid no longer listened to her. She ran to the Duke with the words, "Kiran, I'm coming!" The maid shouted after her that she couldn't constantly run after his lordship. However, Melusine replied that she did as she wanted. Siren spied from behind the slightly open doors as my lord and the count dined in the dining room. Anna tried to pull the mistress down and insisted on returning to the room. Because if they are noticed, then there will be trouble. The dining room was large and bright. In the center, on a large carpet, was an impressive dining table. It was filled with many dishes. The servants stood a little further away, near the door, ready to serve the owners at any moment. The men at the table were talking peacefully. Melusine did not let up. She wondered why they couldn't be here. The maid began to explain in a whisper that the gentlemen were having dinner, and they should not interfere with the conversation of nobles who are discussing pressing matters. The mermaid was delighted at the word food. Anna was already on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She replied that men don't just eat. Then the door opened slightly from the inside and a footman looked out. The girls fell in surprise. He wondered what was going on here. The maid began to apologize and promised that they would leave immediately. The guy thought about it. Everything is fine. His lordship just said that it was better not to distract him like that. More precisely, just enter, and not stand here. These words were like green light for the nymph. Her eyes sparkled with delight and she headed straight to the dining room. The Duke had just sipped a glass of wine. Melusine was seated at the table. She was intently trying to cut the cooked fish, clanging her cutlery against the porcelain. His lordship continued his conversation with Ian. He asked how much they spent this time. The count replied that about 60 million fears. My lord remarked that he had only heard a few days ago that the emperor had acquired a diamond mine. His Excellency asked why he was buying them if he did not think of mining stones. Probably Marquis Hesnal is pushing him to this. Siren puffed intently over the fish. Kiran took a sip of wine and replied that the old man was in a hurry, since he was trying to squeeze every penny out of the imperial treasury. Then he asked whether Sirtis Castle had been completed and received the answer that this year. This time the mermaid creaked her instruments too loudly and drew attention to herself. She cringed a little, realizing that she had made a mistake. The castle will be finally ready at the beginning of this winter. Now the interior decoration is underway. There are now many dissatisfied people among the aristocrats, since all efforts are aimed at preparing for the founding day of the country. The lord asked how the Marquis would now commit outrages if he got rid of the control of the former emperor. This is a great time to be the Marquis of Hesnal. Yang agreed, but precisely because of this, some middle-ranking aristocrats also decided to support Triton. At that moment, the girl overdid it, and due to the strong pressure, pieces of fish scattered in all directions. Kiran couldn't resist and tricked Melusine with the fact that she was asking to have a meal with them, but didn't know how to behave at the table. The nymph froze with a fork in her hand, looking with huge eyes. Then his lordship asked the servants to serve the mermaid's usual food. Immediately they brought 2 raw fish in a plate. The girl continued to twirl the fork and knife in her hands. Seeing that she was hesitating, the Lord asked that perhaps she did not want to eat today. Siren, pointing to the cutlery, asked Kieran what it was. Ian choked on his drink at such familiarity. He coughed and asked if she had really called my lord by name. But the Duke made a remark to Melusine on another matter. She mispronounced his name. You need to focus on the first part of the name and pronounce the second more softly. The mermaid tried to pronounce it correctly. Lord said more practice is needed. And if using a fork is inconvenient, then you can eat as best you can. But don't just sit there. The nymph was delighted, wished herself a bon appetit, grabbed the fish with both hands and sank her teeth into it. His lordship and the servants were shocked by this way of eating food, and the girl enjoyed the process, deliciously crunching fish bones. Triton noticed that she had a good appetite and asked if it tasted good to her. The mermaid beamed with joy. She replied that it was very tasty and thanked the man. The Duke carefully removed the excess from around her mouth. Ian, still confused by what he had seen, turned to my lord. His Excellency asked to continue telling how many noble houses there support their endeavors. His lordship began to answer, and he himself was surprised at what he saw. A mermaid sat in front of him with a live nibbled fish in her hands and smiled sweetly at the Duke, and he, in turn, carefully wiped her face. The night's training was in full swing. The warriors were practicing techniques on dummies, so there was noise around and dull blows could be heard. Melusine watched the process with interest from behind the slightly open gate. The Duke was drying himself after exercise. Ian stood nearby. Seeing the mermaid peeking out, he noticed that His Excellency had even brought her here. Kieran didn't understand and asked who. The Count pointed to the girl. Lately, she's been following the Lord's ponytail. I even came to training. Kieran was surprised what was wrong. He is amused by the nymph's confidence in not being noticed. It now became clear to his lordship why the commander was in such a good mood. Triton said that he was interested in watching how the wild creature was gradually tamed. Young asked if my lord had tamed animals before. The Duke thought about it. He remembered the pet fox he had more than 10 years ago. Then the mentor noticed that he was constantly following the teenager and rubbing himself against his legs. Usually wild foxes are afraid of people. The boy could not do anything. The animal itself followed him. Duncan teased the child, reminding him who lets the animal into his room every night. The little fox was affectionate and calmly walked into his arms. He could even lick his owner's hands. The mentor suggested giving the animal a name if the young master wanted to keep it, so that he doesn't get lost. One day, Kieran tried to lock the little fox in the room, because his brother is coming soon and wants to hunt in the grounds. Therefore, he tried to explain to the animal that he could not leave the room. The fox purred and closed his eyes when he scratched him, but the little fox is just an animal. He somehow got out of the room and accordingly came under attack. Sometime later, the boy found his wounded body in the forest. Waking up from his memories, Triton replied that he had already tamed the beast. In his opinion, when you catch an animal, you need to immediately put it in a good cage, and keep it there until it realizes it can never get out, even if he dies. The Duke looked at the mermaid, who was chatting about something with her maid under the gate. Late in the evening, when the moon was already illuminating everything around, His Excellency brought Melusine to the beach. The wind played in my hair, and the waves of the surf licked the sand under my feet. The mermaid was delighted. She exclaimed, "See, see." Kieran asked if she liked it and allowed her to come closer. The girl looked at him questioningly and asked what about him. The man replied that he would remain on the shore. He needs to check something. Serena came almost to the water itself. She looked back at my lord and asked what to check. The Duke remembered his first pet. The wounded little ladder lay in the forest on the grass and wheezed. The boy was sad. He asked the shuddering little body why he was here. After all, his lordship asked to sit in the room repeated 1,000 times. There was a noise and dull thuds nearby. Someone shouted that the beast had gone here. Kieran froze. He understood that now his brother would come here and catch the little fox, and then mercilessly kill him. The animal was bleeding and trembling in convulsions. Tears welled up in the child's eyes. It would be better if he did it himself. The boy took out a dagger. Tears blurred his eyes. But it must be strong to ease the pet's suffering. Gathering his courage, he plunged the blade into his friend. The wind blew through Melusine's hair as she approached the water. The water was already touching her feet. Ian began to worry that the mermaid was about to swim out to sea. But my lord stopped him with his hand, ordering him to wait. He wanted to see if she would float away or stay. The girl was already knee-deep in the water. A pattern of scales began to appear on the skin of my legs. She was enjoying the moment. Serena hasn't been at sea for so long. The Count was already nervously biting his nails. He assumed that the nymph's tail would grow back in the water. The Duke called the girl. She looked back. She was so pleased to be in seawater. The mermaid asked if she could go further. It's no big deal. But the Lord shouted for her to return immediately. Melusine laughed and said she would be there soon. Kieran said that she could come closer. And she, waving her tail, dived into the depths, raising a column of spray. His lordship commented that she had disappeared. Triton got angry. How dare she? Nodules appeared on his cheekbones and he threw himself into the water. Duncan's words pulsed in his head. If you want to keep the animal, give it a name so it doesn't get lost. No. You cannot restrain the beast with just the name. The little fox then had to be tied so that he would not fall into a trap. The man was afraid that if he let Melusine go, someone might take her from him. But she was already emerging from the water, wringing out her hair. Water flowed down her legs. Undine saw the Duke running and called out to him. Kieran pulled the girl by the hand, pulled her close and kissed her. She tried to say something, but the man's tongue completely drowned out the words. His lordship drew his dagger with his other hand, and grabbing the mermaid by the hair from behind, he put a blade to her throat. He was interested in how much she missed the sea. So much so that I wanted to run away. Serena was scared. She didn't want to run away, but I just wanted to swim. His lordship asked why he should believe her. Animals are not allowed to walk without a leash. He lowered the dagger to his hand, still painfully pulling her hair. Triton chuckled and said that it was his own fault for believing her. The girl was stunned by the man's strange behavior. Then my lord sharply turned the nymph to face the water and told her to look carefully at the sea, because the Undine would not see it again. Melusine asked why, but his lordship, grabbing the mermaid by the hand, dragged her from the beach. Ian hurried after the couple, addressing the lord. The Duke stopped and ordered the Count to return to the castle and tell the servants that he would not spend the night at home, but in the nearest lodge. Kieran brought the mermaid to a small house not far from the shore. He pulled her by the hand and the girl asked to let her go, but he didn't listen to her until he threw her on the bed. She was in pain. My lord unbuttoned the cuffs and shirt on his chest. Then, pressing the bed with his knees, he began to approach the siren. Partially pinning the girl to the bed, Triton hovered over her. He asked the nymph what he should do with her. Melusine looked at him in surprise and fear with wide eyes, practically without blinking. The man touched her face. The mermaid shuddered. Even if he puts her on a leash, the Undine will quickly free herself, and it won't be interesting to play with her. The lord addressed her by name. It was he who gave the siren a name, so she must obey him. My lord lifted her face by the chin and touched her lips with his thumb. The girl tried to repeat the word, obey. Kieran pressed his tongue with his finger in her mouth. He ordered, looking into blue eyes, to say that she obeys him, that she is his, that she belongs to him, and that she will follow him through fire and water. Melusine asked what she told him. Then she tried to say that she belonged to him. His lordship chuckled contentedly. Then he lifted her face by the chin towards his. The nymph instantly blushed. The Duke began to kiss her, and in between kisses he told her not to act so stupidly again. The caresses became more passionate, and the man laid the mermaid on the bed, completely crushing her under him. In the process, my lord inserted his fingers into her mouth, expecting caresses, but the girl did not know what to do, so she pushed them out, coughing. He commented that he needed to get her ready and she was already spitting it out. Then his hand began to move up her thigh. Melusine was frightened by such intimate touches and began to resist. She asked to stop. His lordship reduced the pressure a little. He asked her to relax and began to gently kiss her neck. Serena thought about how she felt so strange. After his actions, the nymph began to tremble all over. It wasn't like last time. Then they just lay together, but now they could conceive a child. When it was all over, the Undine clarified whether this was the end. Triton answered in the negative, and he assured her that the night would be long. He smiled and stroked his face with her hand. Moonlight penetrated through the window frames and illuminated the lovers on the bed. His lordship taught Melusine the art of love. He explained to her that there was no need to bite fingers, but that they should be licked. The mermaid tried to understand the new sensations for her. There was something wrong in the pit of my stomach. But she was so pleased that she could not restrain herself. She unknowingly bit my lord's finger. Kieran gritted his teeth and growled that he was asking him to relax. But the groans drowned out all the words. This was the first time Siren felt like this. It was a strange and incomprehensible feeling. But it was still nice. She wanted to see the man's face. She pulled back a little and looked her partner in the eyes. Then she kissed her with all her passion. His lordship continued until both had enjoyed themselves. The sun's rays illuminated Triton's castle, standing on a stone cliff. The surf broke the waves against the rocks. The sunbeams made their way through the window panes and played indoors. Melusine woke up and blinked, squinting her eyes against the shining sun. She saw an excited Anna opposite. The maid turned to her and asked if she had come to her senses. The nymph rose up in bed and sat up. She didn't understand what was happening. The maid was glad that her mistress had woken up. It turns out the siren slept for 2 days. Therefore, the worker could not find a place for herself from excitement. She checked the temperature of the mistress's forehead, and taking her face in her hands asked if she was feeling well. The mermaid replied that it was good, but asked where they were. Anna moved back a little and pointed out that this was the hostess's room. Melusine turned sharply and asked where Kieran was. The maid hesitated. She lowered her eyes and replied that his lordship was not here. He was meeting a guest. The nymph asked what kind of guest she was. The maid said that the daughter of the Marquis of Hesnal was coming to the castle, who would become the bride of the Archduke. A carriage drawn by a pair of bay horses had just pulled into the guest yard, and out came a beautiful young girl in a red velvet dress with long blonde hair. A little later, the mermaid was sitting in the pool while the maid was combing her hair. They talked about the institution of marriage. Melusine clarified, "That means 1 man and 1 woman." The maid confirmed that only 2 people get married. They swear to God that they will spend their whole lives with each other. And before that, they enter into an engagement. The nymph noticed that Kieran spent the night with both her and that beautiful woman. Anna replied that it was different from marriage. His lordship is not engaged, so in theory he can afford this. And frankly, he is a blood relative of the ruling dynasty and therefore is free to do whatever he wants. Siren doubted. In her understanding, the more children, the better. The maid was surprised where she could have heard such a thing. Having finished combing her hair, the maid put all the accessories in a basket, and then she warned that she wouldn't be there after lunch. The nymph asked why, and she received the answer that the head maid had given instructions to everyone, and Anna would need to go to the city center. Melusine asked what the center was. The maid explained that this place was outside the castle walls. There are a lot of people there who are selling something, especially now since Thanksgiving is just around the corner. At this time, the largest festival takes place in the empire. There will be performances and all sorts of souvenirs. The mermaid was delighted and also wanted to go. But the worker said that she couldn't do it because she needed a good rest today. But the girl didn't let up. She didn't understand why she couldn't. Anna took a deep breath and then exhaled to hide her irritation. She can't do anything if she can't. After lunch, the city center was full of people. The area was filled with counters with awnings, on which a variety of goods were located. People moved from one outlet to another. In one of the carriages were 2 maids and Melusina. The head maid in a whisper clarified with Anna that they could really go out with the mermaid. At this time, the nymph leaned out of the carriage window and looked at everything with delight. The maid answered in a whisper that Count Luthern had given permission, since she was so eager. Since the siren doesn't travel very well yet, it won't go far. And anyway, thanks to the Lady Mermaid, they are traveling in a carriage. Ondine was spinning in all directions. She was interested in everything. She constantly asked Anna something. Seeing the chicken, the nymph asked what kind of red algae was on her head. Other birds have feathers, and the bald man glistens in the sun like an octopus. The maids were tired of answering constant questions, so they ordered the siren to climb back into the cart. When we arrived at the place, all the women got out of the carriage. The maid said that she would quickly go to a shop and asked her to wait here next to the knight. The mermaid nodded. The maids asked the warrior to look after the girl, but Melusine could not be kept in place. There were so many interesting things around that were not in the castle. There were so many smells and sounds in Kieran's world. She was delighted. Suddenly a melody poured out from somewhere. The nymph shuddered. This song seemed familiar to her. The knight caught up with the lady and said that she should not run around here alone. But she answered that now, quickly turned around and disappeared into the crowd. It was definitely her sister's song, and the Undine followed the sound of the melody. The warrior tried to stop the mermaid, but there was already no trace of her. Melusine squeezed through the crowd of people. All she could think about was that her sister was here. Soon she saw a begging old woman in rags, who clung to passers-by with the words that she was dying. People avoided her, considering her to be somehow contagious. The beggar woman sat dejectedly on the ground and repeated that he should give her serenade. The mermaid approached this woman and spoke in their language. She asked what was wrong with her. Maybe she was sick. The grandmother immediately rushed to the siren and grabbed her hands. Melusine clarified that maybe she was just hungry. The woman nodded that yes, she was hungry. She said she was dying of hunger. And then she asked if she was her sister and asked for help. The mermaid began to look around. Here the knight found her. He asked to return to the carriage because she could get into trouble. But the nymph rushed to the fish counter and asked to take some for her sister. The guy didn't understand anything. What kind of sister? Why does she need fish? However, the siren did not wait. She grabbed the fish and ran back. Melusine ran down the street so fast that the horse reared. The coachman began to vouch and called her crazy. The knight made his way through the crowd in search of the lady. She had already given the fish to her sister and watched as she ate greedily. The nymph looked back to the warrior asking him to wait and wanted to ask for more, since the sister was hungry. But it turned out to be the coachman from that carriage. He started swearing and shouting that she didn't understand who was rushing under the carriage and even swung at her. But the approaching lord shouted at him to remove his hand. The coachman was surprised and froze. My lord came closer and asked if he was deaf, and then he ordered to quickly remove his hand. It was Duke Triton. The charioteer, calling out "Your Grace," fell to his knees and bowed. He asked for forgiveness and mercy. Melusine jumped up joyfully and threw herself on the lord's neck, shouting his name. The girl pressed herself against his chest and said that she really missed him. But the man did not react at all. Then the mermaid pulled back a little and looked at him questioningly. Suddenly, from a nearby carriage, an appeal was heard to my lord. A blonde in a red dress came out of the carriage. She called back, asking if it was really him. The duke waved at the siren and turned around to address Lady Hesnall. The girl curtsied and noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. She apologized for the commotion. Kieran approached the lady and replied that it was his fault too. Milady was very good-natured. She praised her interlocutor, saying that he was so noble, a true hero of the Empire. She also added that they are talking about another of his feats. His lordship noticed that the Marquis said that the lady would visit him next week. The blonde asked if she was in a hurry. She was curious about what Triton's castle was like. I wanted to see him as soon as possible. After all, this place will become her home. The lady hoped she wouldn't cause any inconvenience. Melusine looked out from behind Kieran with interest. He replied that he would not deliver and volunteered to escort the lady. The girl smiled sweetly, fanning herself. She was glad to be invited by his lordship. And of course he will not refuse such an honor. Just what kind of lady is this? And pointed to the siren. She asked her to introduce. The nymph shuddered. But the duke replied that this was not necessary. After all, raising pets is very difficult. The blonde understood what he meant. After all, the more beautiful the animal, the more difficult it is to look after it. And the couple headed to the carriage. Undine extended her hand and called to Kieran. Without turning around, he told her to behave decently. Then they got into the carriage and left. Melusine was left alone and looked after him with an unblinking gaze. He had such a strange look when he left. When she remembered this, something stabbed so painfully in her chest. She stood motionless in the center of the square, pressing her hand to her heart. The beggar woman giggled behind her. Grabbing the girl's hand, the old woman said with a toothless mouth that when the time comes, she will have to choose the sea. Squeezing her wrist harder, she continued that no matter what happens, if she starts thinking, it will be too late. It's too late. The mermaid sat thoughtfully on the bed in her room, supporting her head. Anna asked her if the lady would leave the room today. The weather is so wonderful outside. But Melusine was sad because Kieran didn't come today again. The maid came up, put her arm around the girl's shoulders and replied that his lordship was very busy. When he finishes his business, he will definitely find the siren. Undine asked if she could go to him and see the duke herself. The maid quickly raised her hands in protest and said that this was definitely not possible. You just need to wait and the gentleman himself will come to her. You need to be patient a little." The nymph looked sadly at the servants. Anna suggested taking a walk in the garden to dispel the sadness. The mermaid turned to the window and noticed that new roses had been planted there. The maid was delighted and said that she would definitely feel better when the mistress saw them. Melusine walked dejectedly in the front garden between the bushes of beautiful roses and other flowers. She thought sadly that the maid was a liar, since there was nothing fun in the garden. Last time she was here with his lordship. Siren was completely lost in her thoughts, not noticing anything around her. Suddenly, a female voice asked for the opportunity to pass. The nymph looked up and saw Lady Hesnal in front of her. The blonde was walking with her maid. The girl, fanning herself, said that she did not want to interfere. Then, looking at Melusine, she exclaimed that she knew her. And then she asked if the Undine remembered her. The lady smiled and said she was glad to meet again. She tried to remember her name. The mermaid said her name. The girl remembered and replied that it was a beautiful and unusual name. Then, addressing the siren as if she were a lady, she suggested they take a little walk together. And the girls walked at a leisurely pace along the paths with flowers. Milady noticed that their last meeting did not happen under the best circumstances. Therefore, they could not get to know each other as they should. Then she asked what family the nymph was from, or rather what country. Melusine thought that this lady spoke so difficultly that she should have come here with Anna. She sounds like she's asking where she's from. Hesnal continued to mutter the names of the kingdoms. The mermaid replied that she was from Bercez. The lady asked again. Siren confirmed that yes, Bercez, the sea. Milady covered herself with her fan and thought, "It's strange, as far as she knows, there is no country there. True, there are legends that mermaids live near some islands." The lady asked in surprise that she really was the fairy tale mermaid. Undine laughed and confirmed. Suddenly the maid barked that this was all nonsense, and the girl clearly has problems with her head, since she is talking such nonsense. The lady asked her to calm down because it was interesting. She began to examine her interlocutor more closely. Unusual colored hair, bare feet. His lordship said that he was raising a little animal. The lady slammed her fan. This is good, now she doesn't have to worry. In her own way, she raised the nymph's chin with a fan. Usually my lord was not interested in anything, but if she was a mermaid, then everything would be different. Anyone would happily lay their hands on such a treasure. After playing with the siren's hair with a fan, her ladyship turned around and walked away, pondering the information. She didn't think the Duke was so humane. The lady is even glad that she discovered his other side. Melusina followed up by asking the girl's name. She looked back and called herself Estelle Hesnal, daughter of the Marquis and his lordship's fiancé. And this is the last time the mermaid is allowed to speak to her on a first-name basis. Undine stood confused, trying to pronounce her name and bride. She couldn't understand everything the lady was saying, but... Siren asked the girl if she also spent the night with Chiron. The blonde twitched. She looked angrily at the nymph and told her not to make her angry. The lady approached her and hit her on the chest with a fan, asking what kind of question it was. Did this one really think that the world had fallen at her feet, since she caught his lordship's eye and found herself in his arms? Then she hovered over the unfortunate woman and angrily asked if she managed to get pregnant. The maid called out to the mistress. The mermaid touched her belly and thought, "Child." She replied that not yet, but soon. Estelle huffed, "Soon." Then she warned Melusine not to even dream of such a thing. Then she added that she even felt sorry for the Undine. If she gets pregnant, she will definitely die. The siren flushed all over at this word. The lady added that the mermaid didn't understand why she turned a blind eye to her antics. For the aristocrats of the empire, relationships on the side are not such a big problem. The main thing is not to break continuity. In their country, children born out of wedlock are treated worse than criminals. And in general, why did she decide that the Duke would be delighted with the nymph's offspring? Lady Hesnal grimaced angrily. The Archduke, who has already suffered due to rumors that he is the illegitimate son of the former emperor, will not be happy with the bastard. The lady began to painfully poke Melusine with a folded fan. At the same time, she asked why the siren surrendered to him. Approaching the mermaid, the lady angrily hissed that even if she gave birth, my lord would personally finish off both her and her foundling. Then she turned around sharply and added that Melusine could continue to live in dreams. And as she left, she thanked her for the walk. The girl remained standing with her mouth open, digesting what was said. Late in the evening, Marquise Hesnal and Chiron were drinking in the library. His lordship heard that the Duke met Estelle outside the castle. She left home so quickly and immediately went to meet his lordship. The gray-haired guest laughed. Perhaps my lord was surprised, but he hopes for an understanding of the situation. Triton took a sip of his drink and replied that it didn't bother him, so he didn't have to apologize. The man chuckled and noticed that my lord was still cold. The lord smiled and asked if this was really so. The Marquis came to discuss something, since he addressed him before the reception. His Excellency looked seriously at the young man. He wanted to know how serious he was about taking the throne. Perhaps a suitable day and time has already been determined. The Duke relaxed in his chair. He was also going to ask the question about whether there was any reason to rush, because lately the Marquis has been acting almost openly. The gray-haired man laughed. He replied that a new castle would be built in the winter, certes, and called on his lordship to think about it. The old emperor will give up the castle he spent so long building. The Marquis leaned over a little and, waving his hand, added that the new ruler would begin a new era. After all, it will be symbolic and amazing. Kieran tensed a little. He asked if this meant that upon completion of the construction of the castle, Hesnal wanted to kill the emperor and seize the throne. The guest replied that most of the nobles were already on his side anyway. Triton leaned over a little and noticed that unrest was raging in the country, and the emperor was only busy with construction. If they take advantage of the situation, the empress will give birth in the spring, and if they make a mistake, it will lead not only to disagreements, but also to claims from neighboring countries. The Marquis scratched his head and agreed with His Excellency. But they have been preparing for this for a very long time, and he worries that the enemy might find out about their plans. After all, the aristocrats have long been dissatisfied with the emperor. The Duke tilted his head slightly and answered doubtfully that they were unlikely to be indignant. Perhaps it's just Hesnal who wants to get everything over with before his daughter's wedding. The man shuddered. If the Marquis immediately places Triton on the throne, then his daughter, upon marriage, will receive the status of empress. The guest protested. Kieran bowed his head, holding a glass of drink. He decided to tone down the pressure a little, turning everything into a joke, citing the fact that they had not seen each other for a long time. My lord shared his lordship's fears and proposed to decide on the exact day. The Marquis thanked him and added that he sided with the Duke not only to make his daughter an empress. He always served only his lordship. Kieran took a sip. He was pleased with the gray-haired man's words. After talking with Triton, His Excellency left the library. His colleague was waiting for him outside the door. He asked how everything went, whether the Duke was still against it. The men continued down the corridor. Hesnal exhaled and replied that it was possible. The interlocutor objected that it was his lordship who delayed the implementation of the plan for so long. The Marquis said not to worry. Only Kieran hates their ruler more. After all, the emperor had already sent him to war so many times. Therefore, he is not eager to obey orders if he has the opportunity to seize the throne for himself. That is why the lord accepted the engagement to Estelle. And most importantly, the Archduke's hatred for the current and past monarch is incredibly great. Therefore, there is no need to worry. He definitely won't betray them. Triton remained in the library. His thoughts flashed back to a decade ago. The then emperor stood with a whip over young Kieran. The boy was trembling all over. Tears flowed from his eyes. He begged his brother to stop. But the bishop said that his heart bleeds from how naive his younger brother is. Is the guy really that worried that he gave the order to kill his mentor? He was advancing on the child again. His Majesty asked Kieran if he still grieved for the traitor. The boy did not stop shaking and turning to his brother. The emperor said that the Marquis Hesnal sang to him that after the murder of Duncan, the guy was tormented by nightmares, and he doesn't want to fight anymore. The boy, in a friendly conversation just now, shared his experiences with His Excellency. His Majesty raised his whip. The future Archduke cannot afford such nonsense. Therefore, today he will correct the boy's weakness. The emperor asked the Marquis to close the door on the other side. His Excellency obeyed. The child watched with tears in his eyes as the door of salvation slowly closed with a creak. As soon as the lock clicked, the first blow sounded immediately. The Duke opened his eyes and smiled doubtfully, so that a person like the Marquis would always serve only him. Count Luther interrupted his lordship's thoughts. Looking into the library, he asked if the Duke was free. After asking what happened, Ian reported that the servants had seen Lady Hesnal and the mermaid in the garden this afternoon. Kieran became wary. He said that back from the market he didn't like the lady's behavior. Apparently, she decided to talk to Melusine personally. His Excellency apologized for allowing the siren to go out. He inquired about the best way to keep a nymph in her room. Kiran thought about it. Estelle is not stupid. Now she is calculating whether the mermaid can threaten her position. Therefore, it is stupid to intervene and stand up for her. This means we need to continue to observe. When she realizes that my lord is not so interested in the Undine, and when she understands the lord's sincere intentions, she will leave herself behind. The lady's maids were combing the lady's hair in her room. Anna arrived in the chambers. Estelle was glad that she had finally come. She asked the maid if she was Lady Melusine's maid. The worker was excited and trembling a little. She asked why she was called. The lady smiled and said that there is no need to worry so much. She would like to make friends with the mermaid. There's a masquerade ball coming up soon, and her ladyship would like to see her there. She then asked if the maid could bring her. Anna replied that the mistress does not yet control her body so well. Then she quickly covered her mouth, realizing that she had said too much. Something told her that showing this lady the siren was not the best decision, and Count Luthern said not to make any decisions about the lady without the direct participation of his lordship. She understood that the mermaid was important to the Duke and the maid could not just leave her. Lady Hesnall touched her chin thoughtfully. So it's impossible. Anna replied that yes and asked for forgiveness. Madame chuckled. Immediately, the lady's two maids grabbed the maid by the arms and forced her to her knees. Estelle loomed over the poor girl. She asked why she thought it was a request. It was an order. Anna was shaking all over. Then the lady smiled sweetly and suggested starting the conversation again. The door to the mermaid's room swung open, and Lady Hesnall's maid entered. She reported that her mistress had ordered Lady Melusine to be taken away. And then she asked if the nymph was ready. Siren asked about the lady. The maid confirmed and added that she ordered the mermaid to be brought as soon as possible. Seeing the girl's bare feet, the maid said that even though it was summer, it was cold at night, so she needed to put on shoes. Anna rushed to put on her mistress's shoes. Melusine was against it. She didn't like shoes. The maid looked up at the Undine and asked her to be patient today, since she might see his lordship at the ball. And then she added in a whisper that the siren would ask him for help if she met him there. A strange maid quickly dragged the mermaid by the hand along the corridor. The girl did not have time and asked to wait. Then the maid took out a mask and said that she needed to put it on. Melusine obediently tied the ribbons. She didn't understand what was happening, but I hoped that if I met Kiran, everything would become clear. The door to the ballroom opened and the siren froze in admiration. The room was simply huge with many balconies. A large crystal chandelier with hundreds of candles hung from a very high ceiling, and in the center of the hall there was a beautiful fountain. The nymph wondered why this place was so strange. While she was looking at everything, two men, also wearing masks, approached her. One of them said hello and asked if she was lost. Melusine hesitated a little, but then said that she was looking for Kiran, and then she asked if they knew where he was. One man asked if the lady meant the Duke, and the other one quietly said that he had already seen this pink hair somewhere, and then he assumed that this was the girl who was with the lord in the city. Gradually, other guests began to approach them. People started talking. Suddenly, one lady loudly exclaimed who it was, and then she added that she was wearing the mask of a cheap dancer. They say she entered the castle with his lordship. The mermaid looked at the crowd in horror. Then that lady added more fuel to the fire by saying that maybe my lord decided to brighten up the evening by sending a dancer to the ball. The people started laughing. People discussed this situation with understanding, because they expected some kind of fun from the Duke. Someone grabbed the siren by the hair and asked where my lord found such a rare bird with pink hair. Others began to encourage the girl to dance, since a dancer cannot be left idle. Suddenly, someone grabbed the Undine by the shoulder from behind. It was Lady Hesnall. She said she was glad to meet again. Melusine recognized her. The lady began to whisper in her ear that she didn't seem to fully understand her place yet. The mermaid sees what these people want from her, the same as his lordship. Serena denied and said that Kiran is not like that. The lady gradually led the girl to the pool, holding her by the shoulders. With the words, "No one will help you," she pushed the nymph into the pool. But at the very last moment, men's hands managed to catch Melusine. She looked back in fear at the masked gentleman and asked who it was. Having looked closely, the mermaid recognized the Duke in the man. She was delighted and called him by name. But his lordship suddenly grabbed the girl by the hand and pulled her towards the exit. The crowd began to gossip. Someone shouted, "Where are you going?" Others tried to understand what was happening. Others recognized Triton in the man. Lady Hesnel and her companion also watched what was happening. My lord brought Melusine into the garden. Kieran asked why she always has her own way, because he told her to sit quietly. The girl lowered her head. She quietly replied that she wanted to see him. That's why the siren came. The man reached for her mask. He asked why she was walking around in such an outfit. Is it really just to see him? Kieran removed the unnecessary accessory. The lord asked if she wanted him to treat her like the women wearing such masks. Without waiting for an answer, he kissed the nymph, inciting passion and holding her tighter to him. It was nice. His lordship moved lower and began to kiss his neck. Then he paused and addressed her. The girl shuddered. He said this was her last chance. It's enough to be reckless. And he told me to return home. Triton had already turned around and wanted to leave, but the mermaid grabbed him by the sleeve. He looked back. Melusine said that she wanted to see him and asked if he would come to her room today. She looked at him with huge pleading eyes. And then she asked if he was interested in her. The man carefully touched her face and said that it seemed like she had come up with something for herself. In fact, she means nothing to him. There is nothing between them. If the siren started to have any feelings for him, then she should stop. It's just her imagination. And he walked away. The mermaid was left standing alone in the garden, but not for long. Soon Estelle approached her. She ironically noted that the girl had made such a noise in the castle, and now she was standing here. The lady took off her mask and thoughtfully continued that his lordship did not have the patience, and he brought her here to the garden of the old palace. You can understand him. She grinned and continued that Lady Melusine should have been more careful at the first ball. For example, to your mask. Only dancers wear these, so people treated her that way. Her ladyship asked if my lord had asked where the siren got such a mask. Perhaps he already considers the girl insignificant. The nymph looked back and asked why she didn't like her. Milady smiled and replied that this was not entirely true, but she likes it better when people know their place. Then she asked the mermaid if she still wanted to get pregnant from Kieran. Undine involuntarily touched her stomach. Yes, she wants a child. Estelle's gaze became prickly. She replied that this was impossible. For him, Melusine is just a toy that can be played with without consequences. The lady approached the girl, touched her lock of hair and said that he was caring for the siren and did not want anyone else to play with her. But nothing more. No one keeps toys for the rest of their lives. Then she turned around and began to move towards the exit, finally adding that when she gets tired of her, he will either throw her away or even kill her. She stopped and looked back and asked why the Undine thought why my lord left her here alone. Because he threw it away. Melusine stood completely dumbfounded. The only thought that was spinning in her head was that she had been abandoned. Then she remembered Kieran's words that these feelings were just her imagination. The mermaid walked through the garden. She remembered another of the Duke's words. He told her to stop getting on her nerves. Siren wondered if she was really tired and Kieran threw her away. The nymph knows what it means to throw. Mermaids who were unable to give birth to a child are also considered abandoned. This is the end. There is no going back. She gradually reached the sea and sat down on the shore. Melusine wondered if this meant the end between her and Kieran. She remembered his image. Did it really end like this? Triton walked through the courtyard to an observation deck overlooking the bay. Before his eyes was the image of a mermaid, her look when she said that she just wanted to see him. The lord looked sadly into the distance. Suddenly he heard Estelle's voice from behind. She asked why he was standing here alone. The Duke looked around. The girl smiled sweetly and asked what he had lost, because she didn't find anything here. Kieran thanked him for his concern, turning his head slightly. But her ladyship was not appeased. She asked to give her a dance. They say that the last couple to dance at Thanksgiving will live happily ever after. They will go hand in hand all their lives. After all, his lordship will agree to dance. The man turned and asked why. After all, she doesn't need it. The lady didn't understand what he was talking about. But I wanted to say one thing. You don't have to pay attention to flying insects. But if it is a poisonous bug, then a smart person will make medicine out of it. Because it was my lord who gave the knife to the doll that was about to be thrown away. Estelle waved her fan and extended her hand to dance. Triton turned around. He apologized and said that it seemed he had left something in the garden after all, and leaving my lady alone, he went away. The lady froze for a few seconds, and then clenched her fist out of anger and trembling. The wind played with Melusine's hair. The waves measuredly licked the sand of the shore. The girl recalled the stories of her sisters. They said it was not easy to get pregnant. It very rarely succeeds the first time. Therefore, if the mermaid's life is in danger and she cannot complete her goal, then she can always return. She must not forget that the most important thing is the child. Estelle said Kieran would kill the baby if the siren got pregnant, and even if she gives birth, he will personally finish off both her and the foundling. The nymph adjusted her cape. She decided that she needed to find another serenade, at least for the sake of the child. Ondine approached the water. She decided to return to her sisters. If they ask her where she has been, she will say that people caught her and held her. And the nymph will also tell about Kieran. She thought he was her serenade, but it was just an obsession. And she was wrong. Melusine began to go into the water but heard a strange sound. She looked around and was immediately grabbed by the hand. It was Triton. He pulled her towards him and angrily asked her since when did this place become her room. The girl asked to stop. He held her hand painfully. His eyes sparkled. After all, he told her to stop doing whatever she wanted, and also that this is her last chance. The Duke grabbed her by the waist with one hand and threw her onto the horse. The animal began to move. The mermaid got scared and asked to stop, but the man covered her mouth with his hand and ordered her to be silent. The horse rushed. His lordship tightly pressed the nymph to him. It was hard for her to breathe. She turned to him and asked why he was looking for her. After all, he himself told her to leave. He told me not to get it. Kieran left her. The lord was surprised. What did he mean? He didn't understand what the siren was talking about. Therefore, he suggested we talk in the castle. Ondine squeezed his hand and said no. If he didn't leave her then, if he really didn't give up on her. Melusine wanted to check whether his lordship could really become her serenade. So the girl kissed him. She wanted a child from him. The kiss became more passionate. The lord began to caress the mermaid's hips. He kissed her neck from behind, continuing to caress her with his hand. In her ear he muttered the question, how dare she think about escaping? The horse continued to move. Triton hugged the siren even tighter. He told her not to dare even entertain such thoughts. He won't let her. The nymph trembled all over from his caresses. Melusine asked to stop. She was too fast and scared. But Kieran advised to hold on tight because he is nearby. After which he kissed her passionately. Back at the villa, Kieran laid the mermaid on the bed and continued caressing her. Her body trembled and Melusine closed her eyes in pleasure. The Duke called her, gently touching her face. He asked her not to close her eyes but to look at him. The nymph hugged him around the neck and said that she only had eyes for Kieran, so he shouldn't leave. Then she added that she would do whatever he wanted. The man smiled and replied that he had no special wishes, but she would still have to make an effort. Her pink hair was scattered across the bed. Her face was flushed. Her body continued to tremble under his onslaught. Undine liked the feeling of him. Melusine tried to cling to him even tighter. Triton did not stop kissing her. A tear of happiness rolled down the nymph's eyes. She wanted them to stay together like this forever. In the morning, the mermaid woke up from the sunlight. She did not immediately understand where she was. Feeling her awakening, the Duke rose up and hugged her. The man asked if she was awake. The nymph had passed out yesterday, but he hoped that she had some strength now. Melusine lay down on top of him and, bending her legs, crossed her feet. She felt something in the bed. Taking it carefully with her fingers, she began to examine what it was. Kieran said it was a pearl. Taking the bead from her hands and examining it more closely, he confirmed it. Then he explained that it was a precious stone that could only be obtained from the goddess of the sea. There is a legend that when mermaids cry, their tears turn into pearls. It turns out that this is true. The man stroked her hair and asked if this had happened when she was at Barton's. He probably tortured her on purpose to get the pearls. The mermaid giggled at his touch and said it tickled her. Then she added that they do not cry, so she does not know. She asked if earthlings cry much. Triton, kissing her on the shoulder, answered that he did not know. Melusine asked when people cry. The man remembered his dead fox and answered that when they are in pain or sad. Holding her in his arms, the Duke asked her if she was tired. Undine, a little embarrassed, replied that she liked it, after which she happily added that she would carry Kieran's child and asked for more. Triton scooped her back into his arms with a smile and muttered that she would do as she wished. Sometime later, the assistant tried to find out from his lordship how long he planned to stay here. The Duke, resting his head on his fist, replied irritably that he was in his palace and did not have to indicate the date of departure. John reminded him that he was not in the palace, but in a villa. The Marchioness of Hesnall waited for him all night in her room. It seemed that the Marquis had caught wind of what had happened at the ball. So if his lordship were to remain here any longer... Kieran asked tensely, "What?" The ball was well organized, so the question arose as to why Ian had come all the way there. The Count reminded them that the day of the uprising was coming soon, and he thought it would be worth being careful. Triton replied that he had thought about it a lot. The Marquis of Hesnall, his daughter, and Ian seemed to be missing something. They were the ones who needed him, not the other way around. The boy tried to convey to his lordship that rumors might begin to spread, that he and the Marquis were plotting a coup. The Duke rose from his chair and approached his assistant. He asked him to listen to him carefully. The man noted that raising the victorious flag in battle was not the main thing. To truly win, you need to return from the battle to the mainland alive. He is narrow-minded. John replied that he understood. Kieran continued that they had come too far and couldn't give up over a minor issue. At this time, in the living room of the villa, Anna looked around with delight. She could not believe that she was here. The girl heard that it was used during the time of the previous empress, and it was also said that His Majesty stayed here in his youth. The maid suggested that the mermaid lady had been brought there for a reason. Melusine laughed and replied that she did not know. The maid was very excited, so she apologized for her emotionality. Undine asked if she liked it here. Anna replied that of course. She added that it was a great honor for her to work in His Majesty's palace. She felt like she shouldn't even have set foot in such a historic place. The girl said that Count John had told her that the mermaid was looking for her. She proudly noted that the lady wanted her and not another person. Then she became sad and said that she had done a great wrong to the nymph. Melusine came up behind her and gently put her arm around her shoulders. She said that she liked having the maid there and also that she missed her. Anna was touched. Tears came to her eyes. She fell to her knees in front of Miss and began to ask for forgiveness. The maid said that she was thinking only of herself. The girl deeply regretted sending the mistress there. She promised that in the future such a thing would never happen again. Tears were dripping from her eyes. The mermaid squeezed her hand and asked if she was okay. The maid, wiping away her tears, replied that she was perfectly fine. Then she asked if Miss wanted to take a bath or perhaps she needed to comb her hair. Kieran approached and remarked that there was no need to preen so much. Hearing him, Melusine was delighted and rushed to the man with her arms. She said she missed her. Triton picked the mermaid up and asked if she had been a good girl today. Undine was a little afraid of heights. She started kicking and begging to be let go. Anna, quietly leaving the room, was glad that she had prepared a bath with rose petals in advance today. The Duke carried the mermaid into the water. He was surprised that the nymph's legs remained in place. He asked if her tail only appeared in the sea. Melusine looked at her feet in surprise. She said it was strange that there was no tail in the water. His lordship kissed her shoulder and replied that it was very good. This means that while she is away from the sea, she will not be able to escape from it. The man tried to hug her, but the mermaid rested her hand on his chest. Kieran was surprised. He said that the Undine acted as if she wanted to cuddle with him, but Melusine, moving away from him a little, said that her whole body ached. Triton innocently asked if it was because of him. The mermaid began to say that of course it was because of Kieran, but she didn't have time to finish because her mouth was covered with a kiss. Moving lower to her neck, he asked what they should do. Then he said that he would make amends. The nymph looked at the Duke's face and admired his beauty. She thought that even if she tried to lie, she wouldn't be able to say that she didn't like it. His lordship said that if she sang a verse, they would do nothing. The mermaid asked in surprise if she was here to sing. The man confirmed. Melusine put her arms around his neck and began to sing. But after a minute she began to cough. Kieran asked what had happened. Undine replied that it smelled strange in here. She coughed again. Triton guessed that it was because of the fire. The nymph remembered that Anna had shown her the fire. It was very dangerous and would hurt if she got too close. The Duke leaned on the edge of the bathtub and told how when he was 5 years old, the villa almost burned down. That was when he found himself. The mermaid jumped up to him, grabbed his face and began to ask excitedly where it was and how he had suffered. The man answered that it was here in this room. He went on to say that at that moment he was making a wooden sword for his newborn brother. The boy wanted to give him a gift. The maid said it was late, and she also corrected him by saying that his brother was the heir of His Majesty. Therefore, he should call him nephew. The child was thinking about putting topaz in the hilt of the sword, since it is the birthstone for November. Little Kieran asked the maid if his nephew would like his gift. The woman confirmed that it was an excellent sword. At this moment, the butler burst into the room and shouted that they needed to run immediately because the villa was on fire. The building was almost completely on fire. Servants were running around the villa trying to save themselves. The maid picked up the little Duke in her arms. The butler pointed out the direction of the exit, but a ceiling beam fell on them, knocking them backwards. The room became increasingly filled with smoke. The majordomo picked up the child and told him to climb on his back. They needed to get out of here quickly. Kieran replied that they would all die if they went on like this. He tore down the curtains and told them to cover their faces with them. His lordship added that there was no need to act hastily. It was necessary to follow the path known to him. The villa continued to burn. Tongues of flame burst out of the window openings, consuming everything in their path. Watching the burning building, his lordship inquired why the fire had suddenly broken out. The butler replied that he did not know. The man discovered the fire on the second floor, right next to His Highness's bedroom. There was nothing nearby that could have caused the fire, so he did not know the cause. Thinking that his brother might have done it, Kieran lost consciousness. He recalled a recent conversation with his older brother. His Majesty had heard rumors that the boy had refused to meet the Empress several times, so he asked if the little Duke perceived the Empress as the ruler of the empire. His lordship replied that he simply wanted Her Majesty the Empress to rest a little. She had looked too tired lately. His Majesty stood up abruptly, knocking himself into a chair, and shouted loudly that his younger brother's opinion was always surprising. He feels sorry for the boy, the one who suffered from all sorts of dirty speculations from birth. That's why the emperor raised him himself. He approached the child menacingly, and noted that he had the power and the ability to rule the entire empire, which is why he was afraid of him. The leader looked like a madman. He kept repeating that his brother would kill him someday to take the emperor's place. Tears welled up in Kieran's eyes from fear. His Majesty continued to say that if he had known, he would not have taken the boy to himself in the first place. Therefore, now his lordship suspected that the emperor could not overcome his fear, so he decided to kill him. It turned out that at first his brother felt sorry for him, but then the Duke felt that His Majesty was the most pitiful man in the whole world. He had such absurd suspicions that he even decided to kill his younger brother. Kieran assumed that after a lifetime spent on the battlefield, the king had simply gone mad, so he worked even harder to prove him wrong. However, Triton understood everything only after going very far. In the end, the emperor was right. He killed his brother. From the heavy memories, his lordship began to return the voice and hands of the mermaid. She repeated that everything was fine. Kieran doesn't need to think about it anymore. She will help him forget about everything so that he can fall into a deep sleep. Her voice, like her hands, completely enveloped him, providing peace and oblivion. Ian reported to his lordship that civil war had broken out in the Duke of Barton's family line. They even reject His Majesty's message and insist on the independence of their territory. Triton asked what scale it was. The count replied that it seemed large, so large that the lord alone could not handle it. Kieran was lying in bed with the mermaid, gently stroking her hair. Melusine asked if he should go. The man replied that it was okay, he would be back soon, to which the nymph suggested doing it again. The Duke carefully took her by the muzzle and feigned that he didn't know what to do. Undine answered seriously that she wanted a child. His lordship asked her to wait. The mermaid pressed herself against him and asked if he didn't want Kieran's child. Melusine remembered Estelle's words that had troubled her. She had said that if the mermaid gave birth to the Duke's child, they would die at his hands. She wanted to make sure that these words were false, and she also really wanted to believe Kieran. The nymph so hoped that he would become her siren's guardian. His lordship brought his face close to hers and asked her again what she had said about the child. Then he lifted her by the hips and sat her on his lap. Stroking her leg from top to bottom, Kieran carefully fastened the bracelet on her ankle. The mermaid stared at the decoration in amazement. She asked what it was. The man laughed and said it was shackles. Then he kissed her temple. Undine giggled and said it tickled. Triton noticed that the bracelet suited her very well. Kissing her neck, he said that next time he should bring something similar here. Continuing to kiss the mermaid, his lordship pressed her to the bed, hanging over her. Then, stepping back a little, he expressed the hope that Melusine would never again even think about going to the beach, because she had promised. One day when the mermaid was feeling particularly bad, Anna tried to take her outside, but Jan blocked their way. He said that his lordship had ordered them not to go out into the street, and especially not to go down to the beach. The maid asked for a favor. They need to take a little walk because Miss is very ill. After all, it has been almost a month since the Duke left the castle. He can't even imagine how lonely this makes the mermaid. The Count looked at them angrily. He noticed that he had heard rumors that Melusine was learning to use cutlery. Anna confirmed and added that it is impossible to learn to hold a fork all day long. Besides, Miss Mermaid is learning table etiquette. With a very sad look, the Undine said that she missed him very much. If she went to the sea where Kieran's ship sailed, she would be able to find out when he would arrive. With a huge pleading look in her eyes, the mermaid offered to go with them. John angrily said that it was forbidden. But he still went to the sea with the girls, although even there he irritably repeated that it was impossible. The Count asked to keep this a secret from his lordship. Anna thanked him and promised to follow Miss Mermaid. Melusine was enjoying the sea breeze. Her maid had warned her not to go far from her today. Undine asked if it was forbidden to go to the beach because people did not like the sea. The girl answered that this was not entirely true. For the people of Triton, the sea is their home. On the other hand, it is also the most frightening thing for them. She lost her father in the sea, so she became very careful. Melusine heard a splash in the sea. Looking around, she saw dolphins, which in their language were called Enii. The mermaid was delighted and enthusiastically promising to introduce Anna to the Enii, threw herself into the water. The maid only managed to shout, "Wait!" Thinking that if the maid had friends, she too would not be afraid of the sea. Melusine dived into the water. The maid on the shore wrung her hands in despair. She looked away for just a moment. Jan ran up and started shouting for Anna to call people immediately. They needed to save the mermaid. The bracelets she wears are made of zeolite, which becomes heavier when exposed to seawater. When the mermaid plunged into the water, she felt a heaviness in her legs, which was strange. She remembered Kieran's words when he told her not to forget the promise she had made. Melusine realized that she had broken her promise to her keeper of the sirens twice. That is why the sea now dislikes her and is trying to kill her. She was losing consciousness, so she did not see Triton approaching her underwater. Anna was crying on the shore near the Count. They kept looking at the water's surface. When the Duke emerged from the water with the mermaid in his arms, the assistants were surprised to see his lordship. Holding Melusine in his arms, Kieran noticed that as soon as he returned to the castle, she immediately showed him her beautiful side. The man looked at the unconscious mermaid with a smile. He affectionately called her Mel, and asked if she would continue to behave like this until the end. In her mind, the nymph saw the sun receding through the surface of the water and heard Anna's last words. She was scared. She was tormented by the question that this is what death looks like, when you are lonely, cold, and... Then she woke up screaming. Melusine saw that she was in the room and Kieran was sitting next to her. She stood up abruptly to check if it was really him. The man slowed her down a bit and asked her to sit still. He checked the temperature of her forehead. He noticed that there was no damage, but she almost drowned, so the nymph should rest. The Duke asked what had happened. After all, he had ordered her not to go to the sea. Taking her ankle with the bracelets, he angrily asked if she understood what was being said to her. Then he called her little animal. The mermaid said she saw a dolphin. The man was surprised and asked if she really did that because she saw a dolphin. Then, squeezing her leg hard, he asked if she really enjoyed suffering so much. Melusine moaned and asked him to let her go. It hurt. Pinning her to the bed, Kieran wondered who knew if she would run away this time. He didn't like repeating the same thing. He told her not to think that he would hold her back all the time. Seeing her puzzled face, the Duke realized that it was useless to explain to her. Undine gently took his face in her hands and asked him to hug her. Then she kissed him. In the morning, Kieran woke the mermaid up by gently touching her face and kissing her. She giggled and said she was ticklish. The man announced that they had prepared something to eat for her. Melusine rubbed her eyes sleepily and then asked why he didn't undress. Triton asked what she was talking about. The nymph extended her hand to him and replied that she had never seen him take off his clothes. She was interested. His lordship lightly slapped her on the forehead and told her to stop talking nonsense. Then, pushing a plate towards her, he offered her something to eat. The mermaid beamed at the sight of the fish on the tray. She reached for the cutlery. Kieran said she didn't have to use utensils. She could eat however she liked. But Melusine said she'd try with them. The Duke suggested that the instruments were in the wrong hands. Having swapped them, the Undine noted with satisfaction that now it would work. She proudly explained that she had trained a lot, but her attempts had been unsuccessful. The mermaid noted with disappointment that she had succeeded before. Guiding her hands, Triton noticed that she was definitely doing better than before. Melusine said that she wanted to eat like him. To please him. She wanted to see him smile for real. Chiron said that there was a ball soon in honor of the emperor's birthday. This time he would be gone for at least a month. The mermaid replied that a month was a very long time. She asked if she could go with him then, because without his lordship she was very afraid to be alone. The man thought for a moment and then said that maybe they really could go to the imperial palace together. Sometime later, Melusine and her maid were racing in a carriage drawn by bay horses, accompanied by guards. Anna looked at everything and the windows of the carriage with admiration. She noticed that since there were many accompanying soldiers, the journey would take quite a long time. The mermaid asked what the imperial palace was and where it was located. The maid explained that it was a large castle in which lived the man who ruled the empire. In this empire, the only person who is higher in status than his lordship is the emperor. The nymph was surprised that there was someone higher than Chiron. She said, upset, that he was still much better. Anna, giggling, asked if she really liked his lordship that much. Undine replied that she liked it very much. The maid specified that even if the duke offended her, she explained that she was referring to the ankle bracelets that had nearly caused trouble that day. Melusine touched the jewelry and said that everything was fine. Anna asked again if she was sure. After all, the mermaid probably wants to go back to the sea. The nymph wanted to talk about the child, but wondered if she really wanted to stay here just for him. At the same time, the Undine wants to make sure that Chiron can become her siren guardian. After some further thought, she decided that she does not want a child, but his lordship. Anna asked if Miss Mermaid loved the Duke. Melusine remembered the words of her sisters that in any case mermaids cannot make eternal promises to people. Never. She only had one chance. Never fall in love with the keeper of the sirens. Undine clutched her head in confusion. She couldn't answer. The maid touched her shoulders in a friendly gesture and said that everything was fine. She would always be there for her no matter what she chose. Late in the evening, Triton was with the soldiers among the trees near the estate. Ian reported that they had finished the preparations as he had ordered. Chiron inquired about the guards outside the bedroom on the second floor. The count replied that they had placed 5 soldiers. His lordship asked for 2 more. Luther promised to do so. Then he asked if the Duke really thought anything could happen. Triton replied that he had seen it too. This path is not very popular since the hunting season is over. But there are tracks on this mountain path, which means those people are still around. Jan replied that he understood. He said he would light a fire and pretend to be asleep. While standing near the fire, Chiron warned the count to be ready for an attack. Then, looking towards the estate, he also asked to warn the soldiers on the second floor so that they would be more careful. Late at night in the bedroom, Melusine was shaking the maid, trying to wake her up. Anna, still half asleep, asked what had happened. The mermaid replied that she had heard a strange sound. She added that something was happening outside. The maid listened and heard the sounds of a struggle. She jumped up abruptly and ran to the window. In the courtyard, a battle between soldiers and mercenaries was going on. The fire was burning. The ringing of metal could be heard everywhere. The girls realized they were under attack. Melusine ran out onto the balcony, seeing the Duke fighting. A mercenary with a sword was sneaking up behind Chiron. The mermaid was rushing towards him, shouting that he was in danger. Anna was trying to pull her inside. The nymph was feverishly thinking about what she could do to help the Duke. A vase of flowers caught her eye. Triton was wounded in the arm. Pressing the wound with his other hand, he asked the mercenary who sent them. There was no answer. Chiron realized that it was useless to ask. It was already clear who. Clutching 2 long daggers in his hands, the assassin offered to humbly give his life, as the son of the empire desired. He rushed to attack the Duke but hesitated, receiving a blow to the head with a flower pot. Chiron took advantage of the moment and delivered the finishing blow with his sword. Then he looked up and saw Melusine picking up another pot. Suddenly, not far from the girls, a sword whistled into the wall. The mercenaries ordered to seize the people above. A minute later, bandits appeared in the doorway of their room. The girls were frightened and, trembling, pressed themselves against each other. One of the mercenaries raised a dagger over them and asked how they dared to attack. But the sword that pierced him did not let him finish. The blood of the remaining mercenaries flew in all directions and they fell to the floor, defeated. Behind them stood the exhausted Duke with a bloody sword. His entire clothing and face were also covered in blood splashes. The Duke's soldiers collected the bodies of the slain mercenaries and piled them up in a pile away from the estate. Melusine paced nervously around the room, waiting for Chiron. The door clicked and she looked hopefully towards it. His lordship entered and closed the door behind him. The mermaid only opened her mouth to say that she was worried, but Triton did not let her finish. He angrily noted that she did not obey and was not afraid. His words meant nothing to her. He grabbed the nymph's hand sharply and asked loudly if she realized what she had done. She nearly died right before his eyes. Melusine looked at him innocently, her eyes wide. She apologized. Undine said she was afraid he would get hurt. That's why she wanted to do something. The Duke replied that there was nothing to worry about. It was the Emperor who had sent the assassins. The mermaid asked in surprise why. Kirin grinned and said that perhaps His Majesty wanted to test how useful his dog was. Or having driven him into such a corner, he wanted to teach his dog a lesson so that it would not dare to bite. At this time, outside the estate, tongues of flame engulfed the remains of the would-be murderers, spreading a foul odor throughout the area. Seeing the sympathy on Melusine's face, Triton asked what was wrong with her face. He said that there was no need to feel sorry for him. He had always been like that. The mermaid looked at Kirin almost without blinking. His expression at that moment seemed very sad to her. She remembered how he had once said that these feelings were just her imagination. Melusine didn't want him to be lonely or sad. She pressed her face into his palm. She didn't want him to suffer. She said she would not pity him. The Duke replied that they would do so. Then he kissed her. The next day they arrived at the imperial palace. It was magnificent with spires on the towers, surrounded by blooming gardens and flower beds. Melusine was delighted. She was amazed by the huge number of flowers around. She noticed that there were even more of them than in Triton. They had not taken a few steps when a servant came up. He said that he had been expecting their arrival. His Majesty had ordered the Duke to be brought as soon as he arrived. Chiron turned to the Count. He promised to take care of the mermaid. He, holding her by the back, suggested that they continue on their way. Undine could not move from her place, as she did not take her eyes off the retreating figure of the Duke. Triton was brought into the Emperor's living room. He paused near one of the paintings. Ambiguous sounds were heard from the bedroom. The embarrassed servant apologized and said that the Emperor was still in the bedroom. The Duke remarked that his business seemed to be coming to an end. His lordship asked not to worry. He would wait until the Emperor came out. Then he looked at the painting again. There was a picture of his older brother, the Emperor, with his son. The little prince loved his uncle Kirin and considered him the coolest. The boy dreamed of becoming like his uncle in the future, and he hoped that he would stay with him until then. A half-naked young emperor emerged from the bedroom with a bottle of champagne in his hand. He greeted his beloved uncle. The Duke noticed that they had not seen His Majesty the Emperor for a long time. The nephew asked why he was so serious towards him. With a casual face, he added that he was sure his relative was not hurt. The Emperor sat down on the sofa, his robe open, his fair hair disheveled. He said he had heard about the incident in the Rapiro Mountains. Kirin replied that nothing special had happened. His Majesty put the bottle on the table. Putting his hand on his heart, he said that he had been very worried. Edward thought he would lose his uncle forever. Triton replied that thanks to his nephew's care, he had successfully resolved the problem. Playing with the neck of the bottle, His Majesty noticed that the Duke seemed to be a soulless person. He neither laughed nor cried. The Emperor had never even seen him angry. He leaned forward and propped his head up with his hand. Uncle must have lived like this for decades, as his father's puppet, and now as his dog. The old Emperor called Kirin a lion, so the nephew was afraid that the day would come when he would be eaten alive. But his uncle is just a hunting dog, hard to tame. There is nothing that the Duke likes or dislikes, just a dog that couldn't be trained. The Emperor stood up and, taking the bottle, slowly moved it along the sofa and headed towards Triton. Approaching him, His Majesty touched the bottle to Kirin's head. At the same time, he asked how a dog could bite its owner. His lordship showed no emotion. He said that if the Emperor had nothing more to say, he would go. He tried to stand up. The nephew stopped him by pressing on his shoulder. He told him to sit down. He had a request. Edward heard that the kingdom of Mikkel had learned of the Empress's pregnancy and had sent a messenger. His uncle was to meet him on the western border. Still keeping his hand on his shoulder, the Emperor noticed that his uncle was doing everything he asked. Melusine was picking flowers in the garden. Anna came up to her and noticed that she was barefoot again. She reminded her that they were not at home and that she should put on shoes. The maid asked with a serious expression whether the miss would behave like this even in the imperial palace. The mermaid replied that she was uncomfortable. Anna asked the nymph to stay put while she ran off for a minute and brought her the shoes. The girl promised to return in a moment. A blue butterfly flew up to Melusine. She rose joyfully and ran after it. The moth led her to a more hidden part of the garden. There in the depths, Undine saw a fair-haired man under a tree. He adjusted his hair and angrily asked who dared to come there. The mermaid came closer and was delighted to notice that he was handsome. It was the first time she had seen such shining hair. Perhaps this is the fairy her sisters told her about. She asked the blonde if he was a fairy. The man got angry and asked what kind of nonsense this was. Then he asked her if she knew who he was. The emperor saw bracelets made of zealt on the girl's bare feet. Adding that his uncle was now in the palace, he remembered that he had such a hobby. The girl asked again if he was a fairy. His Majesty smiled and confirmed that he was a fairy. Then he asked who she was. It was the first time he saw her here. Melusine told her name. The emperor said that she had a beautiful bracelet on her ankle and that it looked quite nice. His Majesty touched her leg, but the mermaid removed his hand and told him not to touch it. The man replied regretfully that he thought they could have a fun time together. Then, with feigned indifference, he said that they would play next time. Late in the evening, Jan burst into Melusine's room and asked sharply how His Majesty knew about the mermaid. Anna asked if he was talking about the emperor. The count clutched his head in confusion and replied that yes, he was talking about the emperor. Then he asked again how he could know Melusine. Jan said that it was a big problem because His Majesty the Emperor was inviting her. Anna asked why he was inviting Miss Mermaid. As Luthern led Melusine, they were met in the corridor by the Emperor's maids. The women said that from now on they would take care of the lady. Jan tried to object. He reminded her that the girl was His Grace the Duke's person, regardless of the fact that it was His Majesty's order. The senior maid interrupted him with a menacing look and said that the Emperor knew about it. She promised that His Majesty would not create any problems and would quickly return the lady back. 2 other maids took the mermaid by the arms. The nymph called out to Jan in confusion, but the women were already leading her away. She asked where they were taking her and whether Chiron would be there. The head maid replied that his lordship was not in this palace. The person she would meet was His Majesty the Emperor. They stopped in front of the door and the maid asked them to be polite. Melusine was scared. Undine entered the huge room. The Emperor greeted her with a glass of wine. He noticed that she promised to have fun with him. The mermaid was surprised. She was told that she would meet the Emperor, but in front of her was a fairy. Another woman asked how Miss Melusine had come here. The nymph recognized Estelle. The Emperor was surprised by their acquaintance. He noticed that Marquise Hesnal had mentioned that she had also been to Triton, but she would have told him if she had seen anything interesting there. His Majesty called the mermaid to him. He had a lot of questions for her. Estelle turned to the Emperor. She said she was not a fan of reckless gambling. Now that the Marchioness knew his plans for the evening, she wanted to leave. The Marquise apologized to Melusine as she left the room. The mermaid grabbed her hand and said that she was with her too. The blonde asked again. Then she asked if she hadn't come here herself. The nymph looked at her with frightened, innocent eyes. Estelle replied harshly that this was what happened when you were shameless, and tearing her hand away, she left the apartment. Melusina froze in despair. The Emperor asked her why she was standing there. Then, patting the seat of the next chair, he told her to sit down. The mermaid sat down warily. Edward put his arm around her shoulders and asked what kind of food she liked. He told her to cook whatever she wanted. The nymph replied that it was fish. The Emperor said that he had prepared the dishes he wanted to serve his uncle, and snapping his fingers, he called the servants. Then he asked the Undine if she had realized that he was not a fairy. Melusine replied that she had. Everyone called him the Emperor. The man smiled and said that it was true he ruled this empire, and he was also the nephew of Duke Chiron. The nymph looked at him questioningly at the word nephew. The Emperor explained that it meant relative. He assumed she was from abroad. Then he asked how she met Triton. Considering that his uncle even brought her to the imperial palace, it means that they have an unusual relationship. The servant brought the dish, so the Emperor suggested that they eat first and then continue the conversation. There were 3 fish on the plate, and Melusine's eyes widened at the sight of them. His Majesty asked how she was enjoying the food. He was sure his uncle would like it too. The mermaid said indignantly that it was a poisonous fish. If Chiron ate it, it would hurt. Taking a sip of wine, the Emperor agreed and said that was the whole point. Looking at her slyly, Edward asked if she understood what he had done. A glass of wine tipped over and the liquid began to drip onto the floor. The Emperor asked Melusine if she knew how to tame a dog. The dog is put in a cage and fed food laced with rat poison, causing it to suffer until death. Then the dog begins to be afraid of people and does not allow itself to do unnecessary things. The mermaid jumped up and shouted at him not to hurt Chiron. His Majesty asked with a smile who should worry about whom. He asked her if she knew what the Duke had put on her ankles. If she tried to swim out to sea, she would die. That's the kind of person his uncle is. There's nothing wrong with killing someone for your own pleasure, even if it's your own older brother. The nymph asked how to kill. The emperor answered that yes, he killed his brother, or rather poisoned him, and watched as he suffocated. His lordship is a man who will not hesitate to commit inhuman acts. Edward added that he didn't want to die from a dog bite like his father. That's why he was very glad he met her. Once there is a woman in his uncle's world that he cares about, she will become his new leash. The emperor grabbed her face and pulled her towards him. He asked her if she thought that if he left her here, would her uncle obey. Melusine said no and began to resist. His Majesty grabbed her by the throat and put her on the table. The mermaid asked to let go. Edward said that if he was just going to let her go, he wouldn't have invited her here. Then he added that he wouldn't do anything terrible to her. Continuing to squeeze her throat, he said that the mermaid just needed to be quiet and do as he said. He didn't know what she was hoping for by staying with Chiron, but he promised to give her more. She didn't love him anyway. The nymph became quiet, remembering her moments with the Duke. The emperor was glad that she had finally calmed down. He asked if she was ready to accept his proposal. Melusine began to make a loud noise, increasing the decibels incrementally. The emperor grabbed his ears, trying to drown out the sound. Freed, the mermaid stood up. His Majesty recoiled, stunned. Still covering his ears, he asked what she was doing. Undine sternly told him to move away. Edward, although his whole body was shaking, did not move from the spot. Another menacing roar came from the corridor that you were told to move away. An enraged Duke entered the room. The emperor sat down in surprise and, cursing, whispered that everything ended up going wrong. He said that his uncle had come quicker than he thought. His Majesty had assumed that it would take some time. Then he added that there was no need to worry. It was just a joke. The mermaid was happy to see Triton. Chiron put the blade of his sword to the emperor's throat and said that then his Majesty would not mind if he also joked a little about him. The king addressed him as uncle, but his lordship corrected him by his full title. His Majesty became furious and asked if he even realized whose throat he was holding the blade of his sword to. Triton asked him in response whether he had the right to damage his property. The emperor called him a dog, but he probably forgot that dogs have teeth. No matter how loyal a dog is, sometimes it does not recognize its owner and may bite. Edward asked again if this was the case, as he had killed the previous emperor. Then he clarified that he had killed his father with the same feelings. Chiron sheathed his sword and remarked that he had heard that the previous emperor had changed his medicine the day before his death. Therefore, he suggested to think that the emperor died for this very reason. And embracing Melusine, the Duke added that there would not be a second time. His lordship led the mermaid out of the room, leaving the enraged and humiliated emperor alone. In the bedroom, Triton noticed a bruise on the nymph's neck. She apologized for making him angry. The man said it was not a verse. The song she sang before the emperor, it was not her. Melusine replied that she did not know. She got very angry and suddenly did it. Chiron asked if she didn't like all men. One day she told her maid that the number of men doesn't matter. The main thing is to have more children. Undine shouted that it was not so. She did not like other people now. Only one man and one child, because she only liked Chiron. Triton kissed the mermaid tenderly. She wrapped her arms around his neck and, touching his body with her shirt, stopped. The man asked what had happened. If she wanted to touch him, she could touch him as much as she wanted, and he began to open his shirt. Melusine said she was just curious. As he continued to unbutton his buttons, Chiron offered to help him. Opening his shirt, the Duke urged the mermaid not to stop. He took her hand and placed it on his chest, saying that she wanted to see it. The nymph ran her hand up his body to his shoulders and further down his back. Her fingers felt the hard scars of the scars. The Undine's eyes widened in horror. She asked what had happened to his body. His entire back was covered in old scars. Melusine noticed that it was like when she was a prisoner in the aquarium, and that man hurt her very much with a whip. Such scars appeared on her body after that. However, they were not deep and quickly disappeared from the skin. Gently touching his face, she asked who did this. The nymph wanted to know if this person had also mocked him to get his tears. Chiron replied that he wasn't sure, but maybe that too. All those scars were left by the previous emperor, who was his older brother. The mermaid remembered the emperor's words that his lordship had killed his brother. So she asked if it was true. The Duke replied that Edward had spoken the truth. He had killed the previous emperor. From the very beginning, if he did not follow his will, he had been cruel to him. Triton felt that he would die this way. So he stood up to him just once. And that was the end. He had to do it. Kieran said that no matter what he said, he would remain a murderer. If a person committed a crime, then he deserves punishment. That's why Melusine must curse him, because he doesn't need the Versailles anymore. The mermaid remembered that the Duke had told her something like this once before. He had said that it seemed that what he needed most was for her to kill him. Tears rolled down her face. Undine didn't understand if he really didn't care if he died like this, and she couldn't save Kieran. Melusine took the man's hand again and said that it was not his fault. Therefore, she would not curse him. Hugging him around the neck, the mermaid added that she also knew what pain it was to cause something like that to appear on the body. It hurt him, so he wanted to run away. There was nothing wrong with the Duke running away. The nymph buried her face in his neck and said that Kieran was not a murderer. He was a good man. In this world, only he saved her. Out of a huge number of people, only Triton did it. His lordship smiled and repeated that he was a good man. Then, putting his arm around the mermaid, he laid her down on the bed. The man asked how long this feeling would last. Then he added that even despite what he had done, why did she think he was a good person? The Duke began to kiss the mermaid's hands. He stopped, looked into her eyes and said that if she suddenly changed her mind, she could always just curse him. Melusine cried out indignantly that she did not want to. Pressing herself tightly to Kieran, she said that she would never curse him. Looking tenderly into the mermaid's eyes, Triton continued to caress her body, tenderly pressing her to himself. The emperor, in a fit of anger, smashed everything in the room. Then, having calmed down a little, he sat down in a chair with a bottle of wine. Edward thought about what had happened. His uncle had dared to point his sword at him because of that girl. He felt a thin trickle of blood flow from his nose. This girl is capable of incredible things. She is not an ordinary person, but probably a witch. She can attack a person with just her voice, but it's clearly not witchcraft. He remembered stories from books about mermaids, that with the help of song they tempt people, reveal to them their crazy fantasies and thereby drive them crazy. His Majesty smiled at his guess. Indeed, Melusine was definitely not an ordinary girl. It turned out that Kieran was hiding a very funny little thing. That's probably why her uncle spoils her so much. Edward thought about how he could steal this girl from his uncle. Lying in bed, Kieran's mind wandered back to the day he coughed up blood after drinking a few sips of wine. His body was shaking and his stomach was in spasms. The emperor stood silently and watched him. Then His Majesty asked if he was suffering. He explained that this poison was from distant lands, used by hired killers. The emperor heard that it had an excellent effect, but getting it was a problem. As he sat down in the chair, he saw that the Duke was fine. So it seemed to him that he had again made a mistake in choosing the poison. Young Triton looked at his brother with streaks of blood on his lips. He couldn't believe it. The emperor burst into a fit of coughing. With a trembling hand, he took out a bottle of pills and took several. His Majesty had been dying for a long time from an unknown disease. No matter how many doctors surrounded him, no one could find a cure. All he could do was expect to die at any moment. It was at this time that attempts on the young Duke's life began. The arson of his residence, disguised as an accident, was only the beginning. His lordship has cut off the heads of murderers countless times and cannot even remember how many times he has drunk poison. However, he has always survived. He understood why his brother was so cruel to him. Even without all his warnings, Kieran still had no intention of taking the throne. He said he would continue to protect Edward as the heir. The emperor asked again when he had warned him. His Majesty rose from his chair and stretched out his hands to the Duke. He said that he would kill him right there and grabbed him by the throat. If he died, he would no longer be near the prince. The emperor continued to squeeze the young man's throat with force. Kieran was already beginning to lose consciousness when the emperor began to cough again. It was a bloody cough. His Majesty fell to his knees. Blood came out of his eyes. He began to beg for his younger brother as he could not leave him in the palace like that. The prince was still young and had not even inherited the golden eyes, the symbol of imperial nobility. The emperor was afraid to leave the Duke with Edward. Only His Majesty knows who Kieran is. The prince, being still young, will not be able to cope with him. So he begged his brother to die together. His lordship only now realized the truth. He thought his brother had warned him in this way, that all these attacks were to stop him from doing stupid things. However, In reality, the emperor really wanted to kill him. The duke pushed the sword towards the emperor and told him to use it. He wanted him dead so desperately, so let him kill him with this sword. If his brother had ordered him to die from the very beginning, he would have obeyed. His Majesty apologized and raised the blade over his brother. But as he raised his hand to strike, the coughing overcame him again. The emperor dropped his weapon and fell to the floor. He continued to cough up blood. His body was shaking and his strength was leaving him. Kiran began to call for help. The elder brother extended a trembling hand to him and asked him to die with him. These were his last words. Life left his body. At that moment, young Edward ran into the room asking what had happened. He saw his uncle holding his bloody father. The prince asked again what had happened. But the duke was in a stupor. The emperor's words about how he would eventually kill him were playing in his head. His Highness realized that the emperor was dead. With tears in his eyes, he cried out that his uncle had killed his father. Triton had become a monster. He expected then that his brother still considered him a member of the family. Kiran thought that someday everything would be like the old days, when his older brother took care of him. They spent time together and read books at night. Although initially no one needed the young duke. Now he felt disgusted by this. It felt as if he was drowning and lacking oxygen. Melusine's voice brought his lordship back from oblivion. Holding his head in her lap, she asked if he was awake. The man asked if she sang him a song. The mermaid confirmed it. She said she did it so he would have a good dream. Kiran rolled over and hugged her, pressing his head against her stomach. She gently stroked the scars on his back. The duke asked why. Melusine replied that she wished that such a thing would never happen to him again. His lordship rose and kissed the mermaid. The next morning the emperor was having tea with Estelle. She said she had heard that Edward was in deep trouble, so she told him that the emperor must watch his actions. His Majesty answered dejectedly that he understood. No one knew that this would happen to his uncle. The girl added that she hoped that something like this would not happen again at the birthday party. The emperor did not react, so the Marchioness asked again if he could hear her. His Majesty's sight was cleared at the mention of the banquet. He noticed that he had almost forgotten the most interesting part, and with a sly look he added that this was a great opportunity to pay his uncle back. The blonde said that it was not worth throwing around such words, to which Edward replied that his relative had started it first. He mocked his beloved nephew by putting a knife right to his neck. His Majesty stuck out his shirt to show where exactly. Estelle covered her eyes with her hand and noted that the emperor should take care of his body. Then she added that if he had any birthday wishes, he should tell her. Edward noted that the lady always dealt with that herself. The girl replied that every year yes, but now nothing comes to mind. The king, picking at the strawberry roll, thought about what to ask for as a gift. Then remembering Melusine, he asked what about that girl? Would Estelle be able to give her away? The blonde froze halfway with her cup. She asked him what he was talking about. The emperor asked her not to pretend she didn't understand. Savoring the roll, Edward replied that he wanted Melusine anyway, and she couldn't give her to him. The marquise noted with a serious expression that even the fact that the emperor had gotten into trouble because of this girl did not prompt him to let her go. His Majesty propped up his head and thoughtfully replied that it was so. But Melusine was somehow unusual. It seemed that she was not human. He asked the blonde if she agreed with him. Estelle replied that the girl was an ordinary person who was just vainly inflating her value. She acts so innocent as if she doesn't want anything. But she's just a girl, capable only of stimulating male lust. Melusine told a tale that she came from Versailles. The emperor thought about it. The blonde added that it was a lie. His Majesty himself knows that there is nothing there. Edward replied contentedly that there are mermaids in Versailles. Scratching his chin, he realized why she was called Melusine. Estelle turned to His Majesty and touched his hand. She asked him to calm down. The girl said she would pretend she hadn't heard his words. In return, she would think hard about the gift and send it to him for his birthday. Having put a couple of pieces of sugar in a cup of tea, she handed it to the emperor with the words that it was as it always was. Watching the liquid swirl in the cup, Edward remembered how his father used to read him a story about a mermaid named Melusine, a terrible creature that dragged people to the bottom and took their souls. But once in a lifetime, she gives a magical gift to people who truly love her. So he wondered thoughtfully if there was anything else as rare and valuable as a once-in-a-lifetime experience. After all, everyone wants something that only they can have. For example, like the daughter of the Marquis of Hesnal, who broke off her engagement with the emperor and chose his uncle. The girl noted with a smile that the conversation about an engagement with him had been a long time ago, back in childhood. Edward cheerfully asked not to grumble. He simply said what he thought. After all, men look for at least one of two things in women. Either it's a way to increase one's influence or pleasant company. In his case, he found the former for the Empress, and she probably thinks she can give Triton both. But the question is, which woman would he like to have more? Estelle turned away. She said she was just looking out for his lordship. If this girl really was a mermaid, no matter how rare her heart was, it wouldn't change anything. When the construction of the Cerritos Palace is completed, they will marry the Duke. And no love can change that. The Emperor said slyly that it was hard to say for sure now. This mermaid seemed to have charmed him. The blonde lowered her eyes and said quietly that His Majesty knew nothing about Chiron. His lordship is a man who is incapable of love. Chiron stood by the mermaid's bed. She was tossing and turning in the heat, calling to him. His lordship checked the temperature of her forehead. He noticed that her temperature was not going down, so he asked how long she had been feeling ill. Melusine answered weakly that she did not know. She was very hot. While adjusting her hair, the Duke asked if she had eaten anything wrong, or perhaps touched something strange. When the man once again put his hand to her forehead, the nymph noted that his hands were cool and that it made her feel good. Triton asked again if she was sure that nothing like this had ever happened to her before. The mermaid replied that she didn't remember. Then, with a slightly slurred voice, she added that she was very sleepy. After that, the nymph passed out. Jan was in a hurry and urged the doctor, who in turn was worried that the Count might fall. Luthern, without slowing down, said that this was a very urgent matter. If a person who has never called a doctor in his life suddenly calls him urgently at dawn, it means he is very ill. The assistant burst into the room shouting that he had brought the doctor. The latter was wiping his forehead from the forced running. Chiron hissed at the Count to stop shouting. Ian looked at him in surprise, seeing that he was okay. The Duke asked if he had hoped otherwise. The embarrassed blonde replied that of course not. He had simply called the doctor. Triton said that Melusine was feeling strange. She had a high temperature and felt weak, so he asked the doctor to examine her. The Count could not believe that his lordship was so worried about someone. Chiron cut him off and asked him to bring seawater as soon as possible. The last time they were traveling from the Barton Principality, he placed her in seawater and she immediately recovered. Luthern reminded her that she was wearing Zeolt bracelets. The doctor reported that he had completed his examination. His lordship asked what was wrong with her. The doctor replied that fortunately there was nothing to worry about. He would give medicine to reduce the temperature. It had to be given at the right time. Chiron asked how to give the mixture. He would do it himself. Ian was surprised and asked what he was talking about. After all, the banquet in honor of His Majesty's birthday is about to begin. The Duke asked me to convey that he will not be attending it. If he monitors her condition himself, he will feel calmer. Melusine felt like she was delirious. She felt the sea around her. The mermaid did not understand how she had returned there again. She had only one thought on her mind. Where was Chiron? She had to get back to him. He must be looking for her. Her gaze fell on a shell. She took it out of the water. When she opened it, there was a large pearl inside. The nymph whispered that she was warm and opened her eyes. Triton was holding her in his arms in a bath of seawater. He asked if she had come to her senses. Melusine asked where her shellfish was. The man asked if she was hungry. Undine replied that the shellfish contained a large pearl. Chiron pinched her cheek lightly and said that if she wanted pearls, she had scattered a lot of them yesterday. When they returned to the room, she would have them back. The mermaid giggled and said that wasn't what she meant. She had dreamed of the pearl. It felt like someone was hugging her. Melusine looked at him and said that she wanted a child. The Duke replied that now was not the time for such a conversation. He's not going to make love to her today because she's sick. She needs to rest. The mermaid realized one thing, that she was in the sea and she was supposed to be in pain. She looked at her legs, but instead she saw a tail. His lordship said that he had taken off the bracelets. He thought that she did not need them now. Stroking her tail, Chiron kissed the nymph. Some time later, the Duke came to visit Melusine in her bedroom. Touching her forehead, he noted that the temperature had dropped. The seawater really did have an effect. The mermaid confirmed it and said that she felt great. Triton, pleased with the result, said that now that she was up, they could go together. Undine asked where. Chiron only smiled mysteriously. The horse ride brought them to a small stone castle. Melusine was delighted. She did not understand where they were, but it was beautiful. There were people in the square with trees all around, all talking to each other and exchanging goods. The mermaid said it was like the market she and Anna used to go to, only smaller and quieter. The Duke asked her to look around less and helped her get off her horse. The nymph was indignant. She was here for the first time and therefore excited. Kiran explained that this is the alliance of the Imperial Guild. The thin bracelet on her hand is made in a joint where the best craftsmen work. If the power of a single group of people, like a guild, becomes very strong, then there is a risk of conspiracies with local nobles or religion. Therefore, he proposed to the former emperor to create a guild of craftsmen, to subordinate this guild to the power of the empire and not allow it to increase its power. Melusine looked at the Duke with uncomprehending eyes. The head of the guild approached them and greeted them. He didn't know they were coming, so he was late greeting them. Triton only asked if the product was ready. They went inside the guild. The leader explained that the zeal that his lordship had given him last time was very valuable, but this time his gem is so rare that he saw it for the first time. Therefore, he made special efforts in manufacturing so as not to damage the jewel. The jeweler opened the case, presenting a chic necklace. 4 rows of pearls were intertwined with gold inserts, and in the center there was a huge precious stone. Melusine took the decoration with admiration. She asked if it was made from her tears. Kiran, fastening the necklace around her neck, replied that it would be a waste to let them just lie around. The ornament sat perfectly on her neck. His lordship noticed that all traces were now hidden. Hugging the mermaid around the waist, Triton was about to kiss her when the leader asked if they liked the necklace, and also asked if he should add zealt, as he had asked before. Discreetly pressing his finger to his lips, indicating not to blab too much, the Duke kissed the nymph. Estelle walked towards the imperial palace with a determined step. The maid tried to stop her, pointing out that his lordship was still asleep. The marquise replied that, as she had said, she would go to the bedroom and wait until he woke up. Then, looking angrily at the servants, the girl asked if she needed permission from her servants to go to the palace. The maid bowed her head obediently and apologized. The blonde walked along the cobbled sidewalk and recalled the conversations at the banquet. There was talk that the Duke was unable to attend the birthday banquet because of the woman he had brought with him to the palace. The gossips were saying that the Marchioness had failed to keep his lordship in her captivity. Estelle frowned, indignant at how they had dared. The Marchioness opened the door to the Duke's apartment with determination and apologized for her intrusion. She knew it was impolite, but she had a request. His lordship joked when he saw her that he thought the new maid had gotten lost, but it turned out to be the Marchioness of Hesnall. Then he asked her what had brought her here at such an hour. The marquise replied that he had been very busy the last few days, and that she would like to see him for a while. Estelle added that he hadn't even come to the emperor's birthday banquet. He could have stopped by for a while. She was waiting for him. The Marchioness was worried that his lordship was seriously ill. The Duke replied that he was not ill, but was busy. There was an urgent need to speed up the construction of the Sarita's palace. He believed that her father would be able to explain the details. A mermaid ran into the room calling for Kiran. She was trying to show him something. Then, looking away, Melusine saw the guest. Estelle was surprised to see the mermaid. Triton hissed at the nymph, reminding her that she had been told to wait patiently. Undine apologized and, opening her palms, showed a scattering of pearls. She wanted to show him quickly. These pearls were golden and shiny. Whispering in the Duke's ear, Melusine added that they were just like Kiran. Looking at them, the marquise realized that she had been mistaken. The girl thought the mermaid was just a toy, but the way they looked at each other said the opposite. Perhaps this girl really means a lot to his lordship. Estelle pursed her lips angrily. It would be good to kill this girl. Melusine asked the guest why she had come first that day. The girl asked again what day. The mermaid asked when the emperor called her. The Marchioness's eyes widened and she said she didn't understand what she was talking about. She met her for the first time after a long time. Then she added that in any case she was glad to see his lordship in good health. Since the completion date of the Sarita's palace has moved forward, it means that their wedding will also be earlier than planned. She hoped to visit the duchy in the near future. She would like to understand the living conditions in the palace and decorate the space in which she would live in the future. Kiran replied that she could do whatever she wanted. Moving closer to her, he added seriously that she should not do anything stupid behind his back anymore. It sounded like a threat. After which Triton left the room, leaving the marquise alone. Late that night, lying on her bed, Melusine tore the necklace from her neck. When Kiran left then, he never returned. Hugging her pillow, the mermaid thought that this time he would be late again because of an emergency job. Or maybe it was because of the wedding, because he had to marry Estelle soon. The thought made her chest clench. She tried to calm herself down, saying there was no point in worrying. She only had to bear a child from him. And when the nymph became pregnant, the sisters said that she had to get rid of the keeper of the sirens. She knows that this is their rule. Even if she doesn't like it, Melusine can't escape her fate. The first snow had already fallen, but the Duke and the mermaid were still visiting the imperial palace. For the first time since that incident, they were invited to an audience with the emperor. While waiting for his majesty, the nymph nervously tugged at the hem of her dress. Kieran squeezed her hands and asked her not to worry. He said that they were together today. The door swung open and Edward walked into the room. He greeted his uncle cheerfully and praised him for coming to the palace so early. Pouring tea into cups, the emperor remarked that they would soon be returning back to the duchy. Not much time had passed since Triton had arrived at the palace, but they would have to say goodbye nonetheless. The Duke said he regretted it. Looking at the porcelain teapot, Edward said that he liked his gift very much. The more he looked at it, the more beautiful it seemed. It is so beautiful and fragile. It seems that it could fall apart from one touch. The emperor looked slyly at his relative and added that his uncle knew it too. The Duke tensed up. His Majesty said that this gift was not bad, but in fact there was something else that he wanted. Edward asked to fulfill his request. Kieran agreed. His Majesty clapped his hands and noticed that he was touched. With a smile on his face, he asked to catch a mermaid for him. His lordship replied that he did not understand what he was talking about. The emperor crossed his arms over his chest and leaned his elbows against the back of the sofa. He remarked that it was not funny to pretend not to understand. The late emperor was very knowledgeable about mermaid legends. Recently, His Majesty was remembering his father and suddenly wanted to see a mermaid. After all, Versace is not far from Triton's castle, so Edward thought that the Duke had gone that way on a ship and caught a mermaid. The nymph's eyes widened at the mention of her homeland. The emperor leaned toward her and conspiratorially asked if she knew anything about it. Kieran made a warning gesture with his hand to Melusine, and answered for her that these were all just legends. Legends are made up for children. The Duke had no idea that His Majesty still believed in them. He then added that it might sound presumptuous to say so, but wasn't it time for him to step out of the late emperor's shadow? Edward's face twisted with anger. He stood up abruptly and spilled the tea. His Majesty shouted, "How dare his uncle say that he is under his father's shadow?" Kieran noticed that it was time to end his inferiority complex. He would no longer ignore his rudeness like last time. The Duke stood up, grabbed Melusine by the hand and quickly walked with her towards the exit. The mermaid could barely keep up with him. She called out to him. His lordship replied that she had seen something she should not have seen. Then he looked back and asked if she was very scared. The nymph answered that she was not. She was surprised that he could talk to the emperor like that. Kieran said that since Edward had decided to take what was his, it was bound to happen, so she didn't have to worry about it. Melusine replied that she thought the emperor liked the Duke. Triton said that she was just as naive as he was. The man stroked her hair and remarked that if he thought the same way she did, perhaps something would change. But there was no use thinking about it now. Early in the morning, Anna woke the mermaid. She sleepily asked where Kieran had gone. Opening the curtains, the maid replied that the Duke had gone to the palace to see the emperor. He said he felt so bad that he didn't even say goodbye properly. The emperor prepared a farewell dinner for him. Melusine shielded her eyes from the sun's rays. Kieran and His Majesty had quarreled before. Then she asked why they wanted to say goodbye again. While tying up the curtains, Anna replied that the mermaid should watch her words. Otherwise, there would be big problems. They are a family. Even if they quarrel in the family, they quickly make peace. The nymph remembered the Duke's words after that quarrel. She frowned, realizing that their quarrel did not seem so simple. She turned to the maid, but she refused, not letting her finish. Melusine cried out why she would not listen to her. Anna answered sharply that she knew the miss would ask to see his lordship. She knows very well how much she likes the Duke, but there are things a mermaid cannot do. Melusine frowned, and the maid added that moreover, it was dangerous to go out into the street now. The mermaid jumped out of bed and headed for the door, where she came face to face with Ian. The man said he knew this would happen. His lordship ordered that she should not be allowed into the palace under any circumstances. Undine clenched her fists and ordered that she be let in. The count replied that the master had ordered him to prepare breakfast for her so that she would definitely eat. A servant entered the room with a set table on wheels. Pointing to 3 fish on a plate, Jan said that the palace had sent provisions for a farewell dinner. The mermaid recognized the fish. It was a Santopterus. She shouted that it was a poisonous fish. If Edward gave her to the Duke, there would be big problems. She would never allow that. Never. The Count replied that most likely everything would be fine. Melusine stared at him in surprise. Ian repeated once again that everything would be fine with his lordship. It wouldn't be the first time he'd eaten poisoned food. The mermaid froze. She clarified that he had eaten something like this many times before. Luthern calmly confirmed and added that there was no need to worry. After adjusting his hair, the assistant suggested waiting in the bedroom. As soon as he heard any news, he would immediately inform him. Melusine asked that they leave it like this so that Kieran would eat the poison. The Count shouted that this was the Imperial Palace and it was dangerous to act hastily there. If they stay here, it might even help his lordship more. Nymph said she just didn't want Kieran to get hurt. She didn't want to leave him alone. Melusine quickly turned around and resolutely headed towards the window. Throwing her leg on the windowsill, she asked if John would not let her see the Duke even like that. Anna, shocked, asked what Miss was doing. The Count replied that he could not disobey his lordship's order. The maid rushed to the window with tears in her eyes. She saw that the nymph had landed on Triton. Kieran knocked down, cursed, and looking into Melusine's eyes, asked what it was. The man stood up and angrily asked her if she realized what she had just done. After all, she could have gotten hurt or even died. But the mermaid was glad that he was safe. She was very afraid that he would be harmed. With tears in her eyes, Melusine said that she knew the Emperor would give him something. For example, a poisonous fish. She wanted to tell him about it. Still crying, the mermaid apologized for being late. Kieran angrily asked her that she jumped out of the window so that he wouldn't eat the poisoned food. The nymph did not answer but simply lowered her head. The Duke shouted at her to speak. The mermaid looked up and said yes, because the sisters who ate the fish got sick and then died. She was afraid that his lordship would die too. The man calmly replied that she should not worry, as he said that he had always been in such a situation. Melusine looked at him incredulously, her pink hair fluttering in the wind. The Duke asked how many times he had to tell her not to worry and to save him. But the mermaid objected that even if it had always been like this, it did not mean that it did not hurt him. Pressing herself against him, the Undine said that she did not want it to be like this. She asked him not to die. He must live. She would do anything for that. Kieran was surprised by her words. As he held her close, he realized he had heard an ancient language. At sunset, they were already sitting on the seashore. The Duke asked if she had come to her senses. Sitting on his lap, the mermaid confirmed. Then she noticed that they were near the sea. Triton said that they no longer needed to be in the palace, so they came here straight away. She was overexcited and slept without even waking up. He asked if she felt the water since she woke up right away. Melusine replied that she had wanted to come here very much, but she knew that she could not. But it did not matter now, because she had come with him. The nymph rose and ran along the beach. She turned her face to the wind and enjoyed the sea breeze. Triton watched her from his seat on the sand. The mermaid turned to him and innocently asked if she could enter the sea. The Duke replied that she should do whatever she wanted. Then he asked at what point she needed his approval. Kieran, rising from the sand, told her to just walk. His lordship approached the mermaid and asked if she had become afraid of the sea. Melusine calmly replied that she did not. Then the man suggested that they go together. The mermaid asked again. Kieran confirmed that she was with him. Undine jumped into his arms in joy. She asked how they would go together. Looking into her eyes, his lordship suggested one way. He picked her up and headed towards the sea. Walking into the water fully clothed, the Duke told her to hold on tight. As soon as Melusine's feet sank into the water, they immediately turned into a tail. Watching this magical act, his lordship kissed her on the cheek. Then he asked the nymph to never do such a thing again, because he was not so weak that he needed her help. Undine pouted silently. Kieran asked for an answer. The mermaid replied that no, she would not sit idly by if something happened to him. Melusine shouted that she would do this as long as necessary. Triton playfully pinched her cheeks and remarked that perhaps he had been too lenient with her lately. The mermaid stubbornly repeated that if something happened to Kieran, she would go after him, find him and help him, because that's what she wanted. The man remarked that this was quite unusual, but there was no need for it anymore. The nymph looked at him questioningly. The Duke smiled and replied that he would not leave her alone again. He had decided everything. Their foreheads touched. They looked into each other's eyes as snowflakes began to slowly fall from the sky. Melusine stretched out her hand and asked what was falling from the sky. His lordship replied that it was snowing. The mermaid didn't understand what it was. Triton explained that it was peas made of frozen water from the sky. The nymph was having fun trying to catch a snowflake. She was surprised to hear that there was water in the sky too. Chiron pulled the Undine closer to him by the waist. She looked at him questioningly. His lordship said that she had promised that if anything happened to him, she would follow him, so he asked her not to go. Holding her tighter, the Duke said that the mermaid no longer belonged to the sea. You should never forget the person who holds you. Triton sat in the yard near an artificial reservoir with seawater and read a book. The mermaid emerged from the pond and, leaning against the shore, exclaimed how much she liked it here. She asked if he would come to see her. The man, without looking up from his book, replied that he did not. Melusine noticed that the water was very refreshing. Since Chiron is busy every day, Anna said that if he continues like this, he might get sick. So the nymph suggested that he go to her quickly. As soon as he entered the seawater, he would immediately feel better. The Duke closed the book, apologized, and said he was not a mermaid. He walked up to the pool and, placing his foot on the coastal stone, leaned toward her. Chiron said that it was worth bringing the seawater here for this reason, because he can see it even from the castle grounds. Melusine happily said that she also liked that he brought her sea here. Then, taking a deep breath, the nymph noted that that was enough for today. She began to climb out of the pond. The Duke was waiting with a towel. He called her to dry her off, because if she didn't dry herself off well, it would be bad. Triton began to dry her legs with a towel. From his movements, the mermaid's limbs began to tremble. Melusine said that when he wiped there, she felt strange. Chiron asked if he should stop. The nymph embraced him and told him to continue. His lordship picked her up in his arms and carried her into the palace through the snowy courtyard. They continued in the bedroom right on the carpet. After the climax, the mermaid's body was still shaking. Looking into his eyes from under half-lowered eyelids, Melusine asked if he liked it too. The man replied that it was not bad. He had said so before. The nymph asked if not bad was different from like. She asked him if he liked her. Chiron wondered if he could just say he liked her. Every second he was afraid she would leave him. It's even funny. The Duke hugged her and said how could she not be liked? The mermaid replied that she understood. If Chiron wanted to do something to her not out of love, but simply something not bad, then fine. If he liked it, then she liked it too. A little later in the study, John asked if the Marquise had chosen a wedding date. His lordship replied that it had not been a month since he returned home. The Count noted that at first the Hesnels were going to postpone the wedding, but now they wanted to finish everything quickly. Looking out the window, Triton said that he believed that the Marquis wanted to arrange both a wedding and a usurpation of the throne at the same time. Ian agreed, and added that he had also heard that Lady Estelle was egging on her father. Chiron was slightly distracted by Melusine and the maid below. The mermaid was delighted with some flowers in her palms, which she showed to Anna. Luthern said that this time the lady will come to the duchy with the Marquis. They want to get busy with the preparations for the palace. His lordship sighed heavily and replied that he had given his permission. He had no other choice. Ian apologized for his tactlessness, and noted that his lordship had moved the mermaid's bedroom closer to his own. Perhaps it would make sense to keep her at the villa for a while. He thought it would be bad if she met Lady Hesnel. Chiron replied that the nymph did not particularly care. The Count tried to object, but Triton knew what he wanted to say. The Marquises would arrive in 2 days. The Duke has given orders to give Duchess Estelle's room. It is far from Melusine's room, so they will not collide. It is their only way out. The mermaid and her maid sat down on a bench near the fountain. Anna handed her an orange fruit. Melusine asked what it was. The maid replied that it was an orange. This time she brought something tasty. Miss only eats fish, but maybe she would like fruit too. The nymph looked at the orange with interest and immediately bit it. Anna stopped her and said that the hard peel had to be peeled. The maid showed how to peel the orange and handed over the pulp for the miss to try. Melusine cautiously tasted it and beamed. She liked the taste. Anna was glad that the mermaid could eat fruit. Undine began to devour the rest of the fruit, delighted that it was very tasty. The maid only had time to pass her the slices. They didn't even notice how the Marchioness and her retinue approached them. She sarcastically remarked that she didn't immediately guess who could be making such tactless noise in the street. With undisguised distaste, Estelle said that the way Miss Melusine ate was like an animal. Then she turned to her maids, asking if they had brought what she had asked them to prepare. One of the workers took out a box. The Marquise asked her retinue to leave her for a while, as she had something to talk about with Miss Melusine. She also asked Anna to leave them. The maid noticed that she was ordered not to go far from Miss. The mermaid told her not to worry. She was fine. She would talk to Lady Estelle. The ladies went into the gazebo and sat down at a table. The nymph asked what the Marchioness wanted to tell her. The blonde replied that it was nothing special. Putting the box on the table, she said that she wanted to give her something. Melusine asked what it was. Estelle replied that it was what she needed and offered to open it. Undine opened the chest. Inside was a bottle with a strange liquid. The mermaid stared at it with uncomprehending eyes. She noticed that the substance was a strange color, and she asked again what it was. The Marquise replied that it was a contraceptive decoction. Taking out the bottle, Melusine asked again. The lady explained that if she drank it, she would not become pregnant. She will marry his lordship soon. The earliest is before the end of the year. The latest is next spring. Taking a sip of tea, Estelle continued. Things will get complicated if there is an unwanted child. The mermaid lowered her head and asked if the Marquis really hated her. The blonde asked again. Melusine clarified that she did not like that she would bear a child to Chiron. Her Grace frowned a little and confirmed. She rose from her chair and said that if the man who marries her gets a successor from a woman who looks like an animal, it will be terrible. Coming close to the mermaid, Estelle said that if she gave birth to an illegitimate child of the imperial family, she would be in big trouble. Therefore, it will be better if she obeys and drinks this decoction. For her own well-being. Melusine frowned. She knew it was a lie. Because if it was for her own well-being, she wouldn't feel this way. Every time the Marquise looks at her, she says only terrible things. Perhaps she loves Chiron. But every time the nymph sees her, she feels a sharp pain in her stomach. She would like the Duke to look only at her. So she thanked her ladyship and firmly said that she did not need this decoction. At this time, the Marquis was talking to his lordship in the study. He asked in surprise whether Triton really wanted to start the operation in a month. Crossing his arms over his chest, Chiron asked if that wasn't what he wanted. Hesnal confirmed it. He then asked whether he would need to occupy the capital while the Duke raided the imperial palace. His lordship replied that he had not. He planned to send Count Luthern to the capital. He would be with him at the imperial palace. His Grace meekly replied that if such was his will, he would obey. Then he asked what about the wedding. The Duke replied that they would do it next spring. The man beamed and asked if he had already discussed the date with Estelle. In fact, it would have been good if Chiron had said so himself. His lordship replied that he would look into it. The guest rose from the sofa and said that the conversation was then over and he would leave. Approaching the exit, the Marquise frowned at the fact that Triton, as always, does what he wants. However, he has to follow his will. There was 1 month left. He would please the Duke, and then it would only be a matter of time before his daughter became empress. Left alone, Chiron thoughtfully twirled the pearl in his fingers. He thought about how he had a month left, and this was the last chance to stab Vertihak. Melusine sat on the bed among the scattered oranges. She glanced sideways at the gift of the infusion, which stood on the bedside table. She didn't accept it, but it was forced upon her. The mermaid hugged her knees sadly. She doesn't think about sex, she just likes being with Chiron, singing him verses, swimming in the little sea, just spending time together like that. It makes her heart flutter. The Duke, who entered at that moment, noticed the sad mermaid. He asked what had happened. Seeing the oranges, the man was surprised that she could eat something other than fish. The nymph replied that she did, then added that she had brought it to him. At first her tongue went numb from the acid, and then it became sweet. The Duke sat down next to her on the bed and kissed the mermaid. After a long kiss, he noticed that she was right. First sour, then sweet. Then he threw her down on the bed with a laugh and continued kissing her. Melusine began to melt under his touch. Every time Chiron held her, she hesitated. The sooner she got pregnant, the sooner she could return to Versailles. But she doesn't want to leave him. She stroked her siren keeper's cheek. So until she gets pregnant, she can stay by his side. The mermaid lightly pressed her hand against his chest and said that she did not want to. The Duke asked what she meant. Then his gaze fell upon a vial. He picked it up to examine it more closely. His lordship asked what it was. The nymph replied that it was a contraceptive potion. Then Triton asked why she had brought it here. Melusine could not answer properly. Chiron didn't understand. It was obvious that she really wanted a child. Since when did the mermaid start hiding things from him? Before his eyes appeared a dying brother who doubted that his lordship would be able to create his own family. The emperor seemed to be saying that his brother could never be happy. In the end, no one would want him. Undine finally answered that Estelle had given it to her, but she had never drunk it. Chiron carefully tucked her hair behind her ear and told her not to trust Lady Hesnal. The mermaid smiled and replied that she only trusted him. Then they kissed again. They didn't want to think about anything. They just wanted everything to be as it was. Melusine was swimming in her mini sea. Anna, sitting on the shore, asked her to eat something because yesterday she had only eaten oranges. But the mermaid only sighed sadly, leaning against the shore. She replied that she was not hungry. She felt sick. The maid thought for a moment and then asked if the miss was by any chance pregnant. She can't eat much, and if she does, she feels sick. When her mother was pregnant with her younger brother, she felt exactly the same. Then the girl came to her senses and said that she would not say such nonsense again. Melusine froze for a few seconds, and then asked to be alone for a while. She touched her stomach and thought that maybe Anna was right. The mermaid heard the sounds of a song inside her. It dawned on her. Her sisters had told her that this was the first sign of pregnancy. She really was pregnant. Chiron came up to her. He sat down and put a flower behind her ear. The mermaid asked what it was. The man replied that it was a hibiscus. It is often called the mermaid flower. The nymph carefully felt the flower on her head. The duke watched her with a smile. Then he said that she had not been eating well these days. Melusine lowered her eyes and replied that she was not feeling well. His lordship suggested that she should tell him immediately if she wanted something to eat. The mermaid wondered if he would be happy if she told him she was pregnant. She turned to him. But I remembered the marquise's words that everything would become more complicated if a child no one wanted was born. So if she really is pregnant, she must return to the sea. It doesn't matter whether Chiron is happy or not. As she added nothing more, his lordship asked what had happened. Touching her belly, the mermaid mumbled that it was nothing. She decided that it would be better for him not to know the truth. A little later, Anna was combing the nymph's hair in the room near the dressing table. The maid began to say that when she mentioned her brother, but Melusine seemed frozen, so the maid called out to her a little louder. The mermaid came to, apologized, and asked again about her brother. Anna tried to change the subject since they always talked about her family. Undine happily asked to tell. She likes stories like this the most. She really wants to see her brothers. Taking Anna by the hands, the mermaid asked her to say again the word she had taught her, which in meaning was similar to family. The maid said the word friend. Looking into her eyes, Melusine said that she was her friend. Anna was her most precious friend here. The maid was touched and intertwined her fingers with hers. She said that she was always on her side. The girl can't do much for her, but she will always be by the nymph's side. In the future, Estelle will become a duchess, but Miss must never walk with her head down. Anna asked if she understood her. The mermaid replied that she understood. Then she staggered and fainted. The duke sat on the bed holding Melusine's head in his lap. He stroked her hair and waited for her to wake up. Her eyelids fluttered open. Chiron asked how she was feeling. Undine replied that she was fine now. She smiled and said that she saw him and felt good. The man leaned towards her and said that he would soon be busy. The mermaid asked when he would come then. Triton replied that he would return after the end of this year, when he had finished all his business. His lordship stroked the Undine's hair, then hugged her and noticed that the nymph had lost weight. He kissed her on the cheek and asked her to eat well. Then he added that he had ordered more orange trees to be planted. Melusine lowered her eyes and mumbled that it was good. She thought about how it would happen very soon, during the siege of Chiron. Then she would return to the sea.